Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever or wherever you are hearing this, and welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast, your episode-by-episode podcast guide through the classic and now Japanese, Transformers Generation 1 cartoon. I am Jeremy Graves, and joining me as we potentially embark on a brand new journey on this podcast, which I guess now is an anime podcast, my good friend in crime, Mr. Andy Hanley. Good sir, how are you doing?
Yeah, I've got my head on to talk about Transformers, and I've been workshopping that for like several days now. But yeah, I feel like this was always surreptitiously our plan all along to make this an anime podcast, and finally the long game has paid off, and here we are with our new anime podcast.
It's like a bunch of the anime series that we've watched before or we know and love, and probably a lot of people can relate to this, where sometimes you've got to get through like the initial like batch of episodes before you really get into the meat and potatoes of things. We just worked it where we had to get through all of the American stuff to get to the Japanese stuff. That was our secret plan all along.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, to be fair, like at this point, given as we have discussed at length, like, you know, it was animated by Toei. It was always an anime, so it's fine. This was an anime podcast from the get-go.
There you go. That's a whole other debate, which who knows, maybe we'll delve into it one day more in depth. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back to the podcast. We hope you have enjoyed all of our shows up till now. If you are brand new to the podcast, little bit of the cliff notes, because admittedly it's been a little while since our last episode. We have talked through the entire American continuity of the cartoon of Transformers, including Transformers the movie. We did it in chronological order as per the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel. Obviously the movie's not on there. We did that via 4K Blu-ray, which was great. You can listen to all of those episodes in our podcast archive right now on the likes of Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, all of those places. We've done our best to get it everywhere we can. You could also find our Patreon page, which is simply designed to be a long-term audio archive of the show, so we're not looking for any pledges for additional content and such. You can find that at patreon.com/starscreamsghost. And if you're checking out the video version of the podcast today, hello, hope you're doing well. If you would like to watch the video version of us discussing what we are going to talk about today, go on YouTube, search for Starscream's Ghost Podcast, and you should find our YouTube channel there just fine, with every single episode of the podcast archived in its entirety. So, what are we talking about now, Andy? We've kind of already implied it, but let's just call it like it is. We are now heading in to the start of the Japanese Headmasters series. This is something we're going to sort of trial for probably a few podcast episodes, just to see how things progress, because there's a lot to discuss, especially with this episode. We are specifically aiming to cover the first 3 episodes of the series, but we're also going to delve into a bit of background information, some of which we've perhaps touched on before in previous podcasts, other information we've likely never discussed on this podcast, and there will certainly be things that we've never discussed before, because there are some Transformers in this which are very distinctly Japanese, but also have never made it outside of Japan. So it's quite an exciting time in some ways, Andy, because this is, when it comes to Headmasters, and this is probably a logical place to jump onto as well from a discussion point, I remember buying the DVD set, which if you're watching the video version, I've actually got sort of next to me, like just down here, pointing. That's great for audio content, but there you go. And I remember buying it, being really intrigued, but this was when I would probably describe myself, especially now having done this podcast and watched all of G1 and such, far more a casual fan, but I'm big into anime, so I wanted to see the Japanese versions of shows, not fully understanding the context of when and where this in theory happens, a lot of like perhaps the perhaps metaphors involved and such, or maybe just how much of a big tonal shift this is compared to the American one. So I remember watching a decent chunk of the Headmasters, but I never actually finished it, admittedly, but I really enjoyed what I saw in Japanese. The English dub, that's a whole other debate, and whether we get onto that, that's an entirely different point of discussion. So that's kind of where I sort of first discovered Headmasters, just randomly. I think it was in the shop MVC, which we've name dropped a few times in previous podcasts. But what about you, mate? How did you first discover Headmasters?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've only ever watched, like, the first episode or two, because I seem to recall one of the UK DVD releases had, like, the first episode or two on as, like, a teaser of just, like, hey, we're releasing this as well, so here it is. Unfortunately, I did watch it with the English dub, which is probably why I didn't watch any more of it, because it was kind of, like, it made it it made it somewhat hard to watch, especially having come straight off of, you know, the classic sort of, you know, US episodes with the great cast that had, and then suddenly it's a bunch of like Singaporean students or whatever it was, kind of doing this as their second job or whatever transpired there. So I was always kind of intrigued by it, and, you know, given what happens to the US series, it was always sort of this kind of glittering sort of prospect in the distance of like, oh well, Transformers didn't actually end. Like, G1 did continue, just in this slightly less accessible way. So I've never actually kind of gotten around to squaring the circle and watching it properly. I've also seen a bunch of YouTube clips. I mean, again, that English dub, there is an entire Twitter channel just dedicated to clipping some of the best quote unquote moments of the Omni Productions dub for people's enjoyment. So there are moments in these episodes we're going to discuss that I had seen before, but perhaps taken out of context for comedy value and, hey, look at the English dub.
Yeah, the English dub, like I say, that may be a podcast in and of itself, which I know we said we're not offering like any kind of tiered things on Patreon, Andy. If we're ever gonna do a Patreon tier, and we would like to ask people to pledge, it might be to get us to watch the English dub of Headmasters.
Yeah, you would probably have to pay me to do it, so that might be the only way that happens.
So Headmasters is a very unique animal to talk about, to set the scene. So that is what we are going to do to begin with. We're going to set the scene as to how and why Headmasters came about, and just where it fits into the overall continuity. And to begin with, Andy, I think it's logical to set the scene in terms of recapping sort of where the cartoon had been to this point. From an English language point of view, we obviously had seasons 1, 2, the movie, season 3, and then the 3-episode season 4. That was the Rebirth trilogy, which again, you can hear us talk about all of those in the podcast archive. Then the show was cancelled in North America. In Japan, seasons 1 and 2 from the US cartoon were, in essence, this is a weird way of phrasing it, Andy, but I think for the purposes of discussion, it's probably easier to phrase it this way, were exported to Japan, even though it was Toei that did it, but that aside. And that was under the name, if I remember correctly, Fight Super Robot Life Transformers. That was season 1 and 2, which was kind of effectively the first season in Japan. Then, obviously at that point, when it came after season 2, Transformers the movie was released in North America in 1986, but that never got to Japan until 1989. So there is a big gap there. However, the third season from USA was then exported and localized in Japan, but renamed to Transformers 2010, even though in North America it was set in 2005 and 2006, and that was their third season. So they still got the post-movie stuff, but they didn't have the movie. And then when it came to season 4, the 3-episode Rebirth, Japan, in essence, sort of went, nah, we're not going to end it here. We're going to do our own thing. So we spoke about during the Headmasters Rebirth trilogy American version in the podcast before, that in a way Japan is kind of a what-if story from an American point of view. The complete reverse of that is, from a Japanese point of view, the Rebirth trilogy is in essence a what-if American version from their point of view. So it's very interesting in that sense. But Transformers the movie did eventually make it to Japan, like I said, in 1989. At that point, Andy, Headmasters had been and gone, that had aired, because that aired from July of 1987 through to March of 1988, per the TF Wiki, which I'm getting some notes from as I read this here. Additionally, there was the follow-up series Super God Master Force, and then there was Victory, and Transformers the movie did not make it to Japan until Victory was airing. So there is a big time difference here as to how and when that actually arrived in Japan and where it fits. To add an additional detail to this now, at the beginning of the first episode, which we'll be getting onto in a few moments, it very notably begins with an on-screen graphic that effectively says, it's the year 2011. But according to the TF Wiki, in the original Japanese version of episode 1 of Headmasters, The episode begins with a montage recapping the vague basics of Transformer history, covering their eons-long war, their migration to Earth, the death of Optimus Prime, the rise of Rodimus Prime, and Megatron's recreation as Galvatron. An interesting note here, though. The death of Prime is of particular note, as it shows him perishing in a firefight in front of Autobot headquarters, rather than accurately replicating his actual death from Transformers the movie. This was a bit of a continuity patch job on the part of the Headmasters, as I mentioned, the movie still hadn't reached Japan yet at this point, and wouldn't until 1989 when Victory was airing, so the actual circumstances of Prime's death hadn't been chronicled outside of similarly vague explanations in the pages of TV Magazine. What's TV Magazine, you ask? It was a children's-orientated monthly Japanese magazine, published by Kodansha, that primarily features children television shows and videos, and to a lesser extent, children's video games, model kits, and toys. The content of the magazine is a mix of multi-page spreads featuring photographs of scenes from live-action TV shows, original artworks depicting characters and situation from anime TV shows, or as it's noted in brackets here, story pages, and black and white manga. As with other periodicals of its kind, it came with a variety of bonus inserts, supplements each month, mostly consisting of punch-out cardboard items that one can fold together. Apparently, it first published on November 1st, 1971, and continues to be published to this day. So there's a fun fact. But that itself, Andy, paints a very unique picture as to how the death of Optimus Prime, or Convoy as he's known in Japan, was actually depicted in Transformers in the Japanese, on the Japanese television side of things, because, man, is that vastly different.
Yeah, well, it's also really bizarre because, I mean, given that, everything pre the Rebirth did sort of get a Japanese airing in the end, you kind of wonder why they always skipped out on the movie. Because, I mean, even in the US, they created a TV version of that film and split it down into TV episodes. You'd have thought that they might have done likewise to make that a 4-episode, OVA effectively or whatever. So it's a really strange decision that they chose not to go down that route, because even with a brief bit of context at the start of an episode, that movie is kind of important. Like, a lot of big things happen there, around Galvatron, around Prime and Rodimus and all of that stuff. So to kind of cram that into it, like, oh, by the way, is a really odd decision to me. And then the whole what year is it part is doubly kind of confusing as somebody who's just been through like the US continuity, because I was sat there for a good minute being like, why is Daniel still no older? But I guess because they claimed that everything post movie was set in 2010, that makes sense. But when you've come from it being like 2006 and suddenly it's 2011 and he's not aged at all, it's like, well, what's going on here? This is confusing me.
Yeah. Daniel's is also an interesting part of this, because I can't remember exactly, but I think in Transformers the movie, this was mentioned on the commentary tracks. I listened to the first few episodes on my DVD, and I think Chris McFeely, who hosted the commentary, mentioned that Daniel was around sort of in the region of like 7 to 10 years old. I can't remember the exact number, but in theory, if you go by the actual sort of years that the series take place and when the movie takes place, in Headmasters, Daniel apparently is 14 years old.
Yeah.
And given how he acts in the show, in some ways you could argue that's because he's Spike's son.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly.
Yeah, so that is interesting itself, and it's one thing we should also note, Andy, and this will sort of come onto a few other details, because of the way Headmasters came about in Japan and the fact the movie wasn't actually part of the continuity but didn't come till later sort of thing, we will also see G1 characters who died in the movie and in the context of the Japanese airing of season 3 were acknowledged to have died at some point but now are back, or they just weren't seen again in the show. One case in point, we see Jazz in the first couple episodes, because in the American version, Jazz's voice actor had passed away, so was then removed from the series. But now Jazz is just back, which is really cool. I ain't got a problem with that. But it is
Yeah.
very weird to kind of wrap your head around, oh, they're alive? Question mark?
I mean, the one that struck me the most was Prowl, who, you see getting totaled by Megatron on the ship in the movie. Like, he is very definitely dead in that film. So, yeah, but again, like, yeah, I mean, I do wonder, having said, like, I don't understand why they left the movie out of their continuity. Maybe that's exactly why. Maybe they still wanted to sell those toys in Japan. And I mean, it's a thing, that this is kind of like a sidebar, but I've never quite been sure. I mean, I guess they just... Because a lot of the original Transformers, were originally Diaclone toys before they were Transformers. And so I guess at some point they got rebranded as Transformers in Japan as well. Because that's the thing that I've never sort of wrapped my head around is, like Optimus Prime was on sale as Diaclone Convoy for a good, like, year or two before Transformers was a thing anywhere else, and I'm never totally sure whether they just rebranded all of those toys or what they did with them. So maybe that adds to some of the confusion as well around what they did and didn't want to put in their continuity.
Yeah, when it comes to Prowl specifically, because there is actually a note about this on the TF Wiki page I'm currently looking at, so to quote them, although he does not speak, Prowl appears quite prominently in a few scenes in the first episode that we're going to be discussing in a few moments, despite his death in the movie. The fact that the movie had not been released in Japan at this point is often cited as the reason for this, but Prowl's name was included in the list of dead Autobots in the Japanese dub of the Dark Awakening episode, so they did know.
Yeah, so just chose to ignore, I suspect, because Prowl is cool. Like, he's a cool design. Why would you want to get rid of him?
A random additional note to this. So, years later, the Facebook version of Ask Vector Prime, which I'm pretty sure we've discussed this before, but just for clarity's sake, Ask Vector Prime is a recurring feature where humans could submit questions about Transformers. Based on unknown criteria, Vector Prime selected certain questions and answers them to the best of his ability. Vector Primes will sometimes misunderstand a question he'd rather not answer. So that adds to what that is. The reason I bring this up is because in a version of Ask Vector Prime, a full explanation is given. Apparently, Japanese cartoon Prowl, as it's phrased here, did die in the events of the movie and was subsequently replaced by his dimension-hopping counterpart from a closely related alternative universe.
I mean,
which
sure.
is noted here as the BT world. Which I'm not going to get into that because that seems to be a whole thing in and of itself. But essentially, that is technically the reason, quote unquote, given for Prowl somehow being here despite being dead.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic sci-fi thing, and it's exactly why the UK comics suddenly got big into, like, time travel and all of that stuff, because, of course, then you can start having alternate realities and alternate dimensions, and you can switch characters in and out of that, because, yeah, like, the UK comic continuity had a lot of the same things of, like, well, we don't want to just get rid of Megatron. Like, we still want to have him around. Oh, I know, time travel. And, likewise, they sort of, I feel like they did it less with Optimus Prime, but I guess because they were sort of bringing it back as a toy. But there was definitely, they did plenty of that to make sure that they could still use dead characters, basically.
So, with all of that being said, where does this fit in when it comes to how we're going to try and recap this? Well, simply put, American Season 4 did not take place. But this is just one of those things where we go on the idea this follows Season 3, but keep in mind that just the odd extra character that either should be dead or hasn't been used in ages is lurking about. I think that is the easiest way to go about this.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, this is effectively just a replacement for the Rebirth. And there are, like I said, the oddest thing for me is just the time skip that isn't a time skip of calling this 2011, because that's the part that doesn't really make much sense unless you factor in that Season 3 was 2010 according to the Japanese continuity, which then means the movie doesn't make any sense because that was 2005 and blah blah blah. So yeah, some suspension of disbelief is required for this cartoon about robots. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, and in terms of actual timelines as well, apparently, literally the first episode of this series, Headmasters, takes place 1 year after the events of the Return of Optimus Prime 2-parter.
Yeah.
That is the idea behind it. So, in terms of time skipping, it isn't like you can say, well, technically the end of American Season 3 could have been a few more years if you want it to be 2011, because literally it happened a year ago. So, there is, like you say, some suspension of disbelief in that sense, as it were, and just you sort of just have to go with the flow. But that being said, with all of that in mind, I don't really think it impacts too much once you get past that initial opening graphic on screen.
No. I mean, beyond the Daniel thing that I mentioned, like everything else kind of sits together pretty nicely. It all follows on pretty directly, barring that and kind of resurrected characters, which I mean, heck, that was happening in like season 3 accidentally in places as well. So maybe they were from an alternate dimension too, and not animation errors. So yeah, there's nothing that you can't roll with. There's nothing here where you're gonna just like throw your popcorn at the TV and say none of this makes sense, because for the most part, yeah, it's absolutely fine.
So from there, it is time to delve into the first episode of Transformers Headmasters, entitled 4 Warriors Come Out of the Sky. And yes, we've purposely not mentioned the English dub, because I think, again, we'll save that for a different episode. Now, context is key when it comes to how we have watched this. On the DVD, we've got the Japanese audio with the English subtitles. Now, Andy, I think cards on the table here. All the episodes of this show are on YouTube. So they are readily accessible on there. There is a version on there which is probably far more visually pleasing, I'll phrase it as. So if you search for Transformers Headmasters on YouTube, you'll find the episodes in question, and they also utilize the same subtitle script as the DVD based on my comparisons. So if you want to literally watch these with us, you can do so. We're going to be going pretty in-depth on them as we have done in the past when it comes to episodes, but cards on the table on that front, that is how we are doing this.
Yep, indeed. It's the wonders of modern technology.
But the first thing we get to see, Andy, is the opening sequence to this show, which apparently its official title is Transformers The Headmasters, though based on the lyrics and how it unfolds, you would think it was called Head On.
Yeah, it is. It is a very Japanese, especially a very Japanese kids' TV intro, and yeah, it's enjoyably so, although not as good as the ending credits, but we'll get to that later.
The ending credits are phenomenal. Are you aware, by the way, who wrote the opening theme to the show?
No, I've no idea.
Some dude called Hironobu Kageyama, who you may know as the person that wrote the opening theme to Dragon Ball Z in Japan.
It makes sense. It definitely has that sort of that vibe and that cadence to it. So yeah, of course it does.
Yeah. So if you are familiar with the theme song of Shala Head Shala, that is why. That's why it sounds very similar.
Just really likes his heads, that dude.
Never even realised that until just now.
He's like, what's called Headmasters? Sign me up. I'll write it right now.
So we begin 1 year after the events of the Return of Optimus Prime. On Cybertron in the year 2011, the space bridge suddenly reactivates, and we see Galvatron step through with a small force of Decepticons, including mysterious new recruits we come to find out are named Weird Wolf, Skullcruncher, and Mindwipe. Galvatron says, quote, and this is weird, because I appreciate now I can't really imitate Galvatron at all, because I'm going by the Japanese voice, but just roll with it, people. I'm going to do my best with this. Quote, my brave warriors, our mother computer, Vector Sigma, is available equally to both Decepticon and Autobot. We Decepticons must monopolize the will of mother computer and then return once more to Cybertron. End quote. So, already barely a minute into the opening scene, Andy, that line of dialogue from Galvatron has established a very big note when it comes to when it just comes to the state of being, as it were. And this basically implying a lot has happened to Vector Sigma, because we saw at the end of the Return of Optimus Prime, we saw all the energy be released from the Matrix, and according to Chris McFeely's commentary a bit later in the episode, the idea here, Andy, is that Vector Sigma somehow controls the balance of power on Cybertron. It's allowed the Autobots to remain in power there, and now, after the release of the Matrix's energy in The Return of Optimus Prime, it's now been reset to a neutral balance, allowing the Decepticons to, in essence, invade. It also implies that the Decepticons couldn't invade Cybertron because of that. Which, thought from me personally now, that to me, in some ways, and I'm trying not to give Galvatron credit here, but in some ways that actually makes sense as to why Galvatron regularly tried to destroy Cybertron in Season 3 rather than just take it back over.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure whether that's kind of what they were going for with this plot point. I mean, the thing that kind of surprised me is, again, given everything that we've talked about, is how this episode instantly goes into kind of deep G1 lore. Like, straight away we're into Vector Sigma, you know, we have Alphatron shows up, we have all of that stuff from this initial arc, whereas you'd have thought that if you're starting this series kind of with the knowledge that, look, we didn't get the movie, maybe you want to make this accessible to newcomers, that you would kind of softball in something else or something new and fresh that they had to explain to the viewer. But we don't get any of that. We're straight into, like, no, Vector Sigma, like, Cybertron stuff. Like, it's very targeted at the existing audience, which is not what I was expecting from this series, to be honest.
Following that line of dialogue from Galvatron, Weirdwolf then steps forward, we're straight into the new characters here, establishing them from the get-go, and says, quote, "One moment, Great Emperor Galvatron. Entrust this task to us, the Decepticon Headmasters," quote. Galvatron responds by saying, "Weirdwolf, you've overstepped your mark. You're just a new headmaster." Weirdwolf goes on to say that they just want to show him the power of the Decepticon Headmasters. The three headmasters then proceed to fly through a glass ceiling, which I didn't realise there was glass on Cybertron, but that's a debate for another day, leading to Galvatron to comment how they could possibly impress him before instructing the remaining Decepticons to destroy the Autobots. Some things never change. Now, the reason they are on Cybertron, as we've sort of alluded to already, is that Galvatron is aiming to take control of Vector Sigma, and Weirdwolf volunteers the three headmasters for that task. Now, Galvatron has now sent the Terracons, the Predacons, and the Combaticons, because, Andy, if there's one thing we've learnt, the Japanese love combiner stuff, flippin' heck, it's great, and they are now all going to attack the Autobots. We then go to Autobot Base, which, for point of reference, in the subtitle translation is called Cybertron Base, where Spike and Carly, we get Carly, Andy, I'm so happy, they're having tea, quintessentially British there, and they're interrupted by the Decepticon attack. They rush to the control room, where they and other Autobots are on hand. Most are not name-checked, but for the purposes of recapping here, we see Retgar, Cup, Grimlock, Swoop, Grimlock, Swoop, and Sludge of the Dinobots, Blur, and we get 4 of the Technobots as well. Spike then contacts the Autobot base on Athenia for help. We cut to Athenia. Now, pausing again, Andy, because there's a lot of setup here. So, Athenia... I'm just going to put this out there. Do you realise that technically we have seen Athenia before in the show?
Yeah, I was racking my brains trying to figure out, like, how and when, because when they mentioned that, it was both, like, a combination of, like, what, where, and also, like, but I have heard this name before. This planet has definitely turned up in Transformers continuity before.
So, it's probably not going to be what you're thinking it might be, because it wasn't for me either, unless it is actually outright named. But apparently, based on the Japanese localisation of Season 3... this is how deep we're getting into the weeds here. We last saw Athenia in 5 Faces of Darkness Part 1, the Season 3 opener, because it's where the Galactic Olympics took place. Remember that rock planet, which didn't look anything like an actual planet? 1 year later, it's now a spherical planet.
Yeah, I did think that was maybe one of them. But yeah, I can't remember, because I guess it wasn't called Athenia in the English version then? I forget, but...
I don't remember off the top of my head, admittedly.
Yeah, it did just sort of make sense as just like, yeah, maybe that was what I was thinking of, because we visited a lot of planets, but not many of them seemed like they were sort of hospitable enough to just be where, Optimus hangs out these days.
An additional note from Chris McFeely's commentary track on the UK DVD I was watching, he said that he recalled that it was that Athenia is supposed to be where they're looking to create a second Cybertron.
Okay.
He didn't elaborate on that, admittedly, in there, so I haven't really delved much more into it, but that's just a random thought in the ether there for you.
Yeah, that also sounds like a very Decepticon thing to do, to just take over a planet and be like, it's Cybertron 2. But... Sure.
So yes, so we are on Athenia, and this message has been received from the Cybertron base. Now, Hound, who we've already talked about, died, but is probably now some kind of dimension-hopping person, that aside, theorizes that the loss of the Matrix's energy, following the events of the return of Optimus Prime, has destabilized Vector Sigma and is causing it to malfunction. That sort of goes against the idea that's established a bit later on, but again, at this point, it's just a theory in the episode. Now, also present at this base at this time, we'll note, are Optimus Prime, RC, Hound as mentioned, Hot Rod, Smokescreen, and 4 of the aerial bots, Air Raid, Slingshot, Skydive, and Silverbolt, and of course, as we mentioned earlier, Jazz. Optimus Prime now arranges for troops from Earth to reinforce those on Cybertron, where he and Jazz are also preparing to head to. He also suggests that Spike and Carly evacuate to Athenia as well, given how bad things are getting. Back on Cybertron, we get our first glimpse of some of the powers of the Decepticon Headmasters, Andy, because Mindwipe demonstrates their hypnotic powers, or, as the subtitles refer to them at one point, a devious form of hypnotism, which I loved as a caption.
That's very good, and I like Mindwipe as a character as well, and so I was very pleased to see lots of hypnosis stuff going on in these episodes.
And the first port of call was to put Grimlock to sleep. Which then begs the questions, do Transformers sleep?
I mean, apparently, at least at least they can sleep, I guess.
So, Skullcruncher, the Decepticon Headmaster who we were introduced to like a couple of scenes earlier, also succumbs to the hypnosis accidentally. And we get our first glimpse. If you're on your Transformers bingo card, everyone, to bring that back now, you had Galvatron just beats up one of his compatriots. He basically just stomps on the back of Skullcruncher, who is asleep, just saying, wake up.
Yeah, which is fair. It's also like the first moment where this series is sort of, watching these episodes is interesting to me, because actually for the most part it feels quite, not quite American, but it sort of it slots into that US continuity quite well. But when it does its comedy, it suddenly feels very anime and very Japanese. And that was like the first moment was just like, oh yeah, this is an anime, because that's just a very like the comedy in like G1 Transformers up to this point was a very different kind of vibe to it than what you get in these episodes. So that was like an interesting, like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, this is definitely kind of recentered where I am in terms of what I'm watching right now.
Definitely, and it's at this point as well where, sort of elsewhere on Cybertron, Spike realizes the Decepticons are after control of Vector Sigma, and this alarms Cup, and this is where Spike also figures out that Vector Sigma, quote-unquote, has reset its own balance, so the Decepticons have invaded. So, very much, the storyline that's now being established is whoever gets control of Vector Sigma controls Cybertron, which, again, based on what Chris McFeely was saying in his commentary, is a very Japanese-only storyline. It's never something we've seen before. It's never been implied. So very much take that as just being part of the way this is now, as it were, in the context of this series.
Yeah, it's also like, I mean, I feel like Vector Sigma has been important, so it's not too much of a leap to be like, you know, it's not like everyone was just, you know, resting their coffee mugs on Vector Sigma up to this point. Like, it's always been like a pivotal, like, oh, this does really important stuff around, you know, Transformers and their origin and their lore. So it kind of works as just an extrapolation of like, this is a thing that hasn't been discussed previously because we've not been in quite this scenario before. So it's like, sure, this is all stuff that I can totally run with.
To sort of pause there for a second, because I think we've very much been sort of like not on Earth, which, you know, we're kind of used to from season 3 and 4, an American season 4 at this point. But already, this doesn't feel vastly different. And as we get through more of these episodes, things are going to change. Trust us, folks. Like, there's a lot that happens in these episodes. But one thing that's really nice, even just from these establishing scenes, in my opinion, Andy, is that it does just feel like a continuation. It's just kind of a nice, sort of easy bridging gap to, in unintentionally, because heck knows, the Japanese creators of the show didn't think, Americans are going to want to watch this at some point. But there is, aside from the differences we've mentioned already, it does feel like a nice natural progression to where things are at, and doesn't feel tonally completely off the wall and very unrecognizable at this stage.
No. I mean, I suspect that might change as we go through this series, but yeah, like I say, this definitely feels surprisingly so that it just picks up where kind of season 3 leaves off in a lot of ways. Because I was certainly expecting a lot more attempts to explain things for newcomers and to add new elements that didn't rely on existing lore, but no, this is very much just going in for like, no, this is just more of what you've seen already, which is no bad thing, to be quite honest.
It's just the big difference from our point of view, having watched all the episodes so far, is the fact now we're watching it in Japanese, which is taking a little bit of getting used to, admittedly. Not in a negative way, it's just that, oh yeah, you don't sound like that anymore, do you?
Yeah, well, even like the sort of the voice modulation and stuff they do on characters, it's very different. We get a fair bit of sound wave in these episodes, and, you don't get that kind of iconic sort of intonation of characters like that is really sort of specifically notable. And it also takes some getting used to watching episodes that aren't terribly animated as well. Like now we're post the ACOM era, it's like, oh, all these characters are actually the right size. That's how quaint.
Yeah, I will say, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of this as we get along further, but some of the animation in this is so damn good. And also, even from just like a production point of view, and it's a little different, Andy, but I'm sure long term it'll probably make a difference, is that this show is also being produced, or was produced rather, as an anime. And to elaborate on that, in the Western world, it's typically, you'll probably get voice lines recorded, then the animation will be created around the dialogue. Whereas in this, as we are familiar with, because we're both big anime fans and professional endeavors and whatnot, the animation is made first, and the dialogue fits around the animation. That's the way it works. That's how this show is being produced as well. And there are little instances of that, but at the same time, you can tell this is an anime, and from an animation point of view, it works so well in the context of Transformers.
Yeah, no more the wrong character speaking a line anymore, because you can't really do that with that kind of recording setup. But yeah, I mean, again, Japan knows how to make big robots look cool. And
shock horror.
Yeah, they certainly do so here. Like, it's kind of interesting because none of these sort of action scenes in these episodes are kind of like absolutely blowout incredible. Like, I mean, obviously none of them are like Call of the Primitives good, but like it's all very solid, and there's kind of, I was going to say it's a lot more punchy, and realised I meant that both figuratively and literally, because there's a lot more like hand-to-hand combat, especially when you get to sort of the bigger robots. I mean, again, this feels like the animators here are quite okay getting to grips with, like, oh yeah, we can throw Metroplex around for a bit, and we can throw the big Gestalt robots around a bit, whereas it always felt like, especially like season 3 G1, it was like, oh god, we've got to animate the big robots, this is hard, we don't like it. So yeah, it definitely it has a consistent polish to it that we've not had in a little while since the kind of some of the better Toei episodes.
Continuing with the story, we then go to Earth, where the Autobots under Ultra Magnus's command have received orders to join the conflict on Cybertron, but their way to the space bridge is being blocked by a Decepticon contingent led by a new foe, leading to the following dialogue exchange. The new Decepticon sort of baddie, if you will. "Wait, you Autobot creeps, come and take me on." Magnus responds with, "Who are you? Where are you from?" The Decepticon responds with, "Ha ha ha ha, listen, I am Sixshot, Decepticon Ninja Staff Officer." To which Magnus responds with, "What?" And Sixshot then says, "I've introduced myself, now die," and then promptly shoots Ultra Magnus in the shoulder. Magnus responds with, "Devious coward." And then Six Shot says, "That's my fighting style. You have no hope." Even just some of the dialogue, Andy, it's great, but I'm glad they've retained that fun essence of the dialogue as well, just from that little bit of a dialogue exchange there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also nice to see Six Shot not looking like garbage as well, because he appeared for like 10 seconds in an episode to be like, hey, look, I have 6 modes, here they all are, right, I'm gone now. Whereas, like he's actually, again, he's the right size now. And yeah, he's actually like given some form of importance, even though he's just like labeled himself a ninja. He sounds like a guy who's just printed his own business cards. Like he probably doesn't actually have a job role in the Decepticons. It's like, well, I'm just gonna call myself like the ninja canteen officer, and you can't stop me. So good on Six Shot. I like him.
So it's an interesting thing to note as well now, because we're sort of going to come into this as we get through more characters, but we've already alluded to a lot of the Combiner toys and such. But because of when this show was released and what the hot toys were at the time, not the brand Hot Toys, but as in the hottest toys of the lines at that time, there's a lot of Season 2 toys which are still really prominent. So you're going to hear us talk more about the aerial bots, you're going to hear us mention the Protector bots a lot more, and all of those and such, and the Terracons and whatnot. The ones that were introduced very late are going to be a lot more prominent in this show, and I haven't delved too much farther, but based on what Chris McFeely was alluding to in the commentary, Japan loves its giant robot Combiner toys, so you're going to see them a lot. And that includes other Transformers as well, like Six Shot. Because from a marketing point of view, Andy, if you've got a toy that can transform 6 different ways as one of the main elements of a bad guys, you're going to freaking use him, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Or so you'd think, but then we saw Season 3 do none of that. But I mean, I guess that's probably one of those characters that was very much shoehorned in at the last minute, I suspect. Whereas at least this had time to utilize them properly. And again, this is the kind of thing that I find curious about this series in terms of like, you know, how much pressure was there from Hasbro, or probably more Takara on the Japanese side, in terms of, we want these toys to be in the show. Like, you know, how much of it was the writers saying we want these characters in, versus, you know, the more sort of business elements of it, which we'll probably never know. But it's definitely, because maybe it's just one of the things these episodes do well, but it feels like it's very much a case of like, oh, the writers feel like they like all these characters and they want to use them, whereas sometimes, you know, the US episodes felt a bit like, we've got to roll out this guy because we've been told we have to, so here he is, and now he's been defeated because we don't really care.
You're not wrong there, and there will be very much other elements of that when I'm sure at some point we're going to go, why is there so much focus on this? I mean, in fairness, Andy, we're going to be getting to the introduction of a new Combiner team shortly, which, it's so Japan, but we'll get to it in a minute, because I'm sure we're going to have a lot to say about them as well. But continuing to where we go. Ultra Magnus, at this point in the conversation with Six Shot, formally introduces himself and proceeds to shoot at Six Shot's feet. Six Shot is confused as to why he fired, and Magnus responds by saying, "That's my fighting style." So again, we're getting some good banter there. After some more words are exchanged, gunfire continues in general. And after the next scene, which we're about to talk about, we also get a fun little sort of close quarters combat fight between Magnus and Six Shot, with Six Shot ultimately getting the upper hand for a little bit. But at the same time elsewhere, we get to see, Andy, Wheelie and Daniel. First great thing about this, Wheelie doesn't talk in rhyme anymore.
Yes, thank God.
And they are trying to plot ways to get to Cybertron, because they are already on Earth at this point. However, in trying to figure out a way to get to Cybertron, i.e. by getting to the space bridge, they accidentally manage to run into a Decepticon, Andy. Now, you would think, if you're gonna, let's say, casually and accidentally run into a Decepticon, it might be someone of, say, like a regular size. I wouldn't have expected them to just immediately run into Tripticon.
Yeah, you'd have thought that, he's not really your stealth Decepticon, is he? I mean this is a bit like the time that they sent, what did they send, like, Ultra Magnus in as like a stealth scout in an episode, and we're just like, what the heck? Like, you're literally the biggest dude here. It's like, yeah, Triptychon not exactly hard to miss. Also, do have to call out Wheelie for saying the phrase, "I'm smarter than most people." Because I'm going to call that out right here and right now and say, I'm not sure that's true.
Well, let's come back to that, because when it comes to what happens next, Triptychon starts chasing them until Wheelie gets the bright idea that him and Daniel should run across a bridge that's hanging over a ravine. You can probably guess where this is going, everyone, if you've not watched it already. And Triptychon is dumb enough to try and follow them, because the bridge snaps under his weight, and for, I think, Andy, maybe the 4th or 5th time now in all of Transformers continuity, we see Triptychon plunge into a watery mass below.
Yeah, they really need to waterproof Triptychon at this point, because, I mean, you've got to be, like, looking at the post-match analysis and being like, look, you're just going to end up in the drink again, so we should probably just make sure that you're not going to leak or anything.
And I should also note that in a later scene, we see Daniel and Wheelie actually arrive at Autobot City / Metroplex. I'm going down that route again, people. However, it is referred to as Cybertron Base Earth in the subtitles. So we're going to have all sorts of naming conventions to try and follow her, Andy, but we'll get around that. Now, back with Ultra Magnus. We get the debut, Andy, of a new team of combiners that help out Ultra Magnus get out of a pickle against Six Shot. And they are the Trainbots.
Yeah, I've never been so angry about, like, toys we didn't get outside of Japan at this moment. It's like, come on, like, they're goddamn Shinkansen train that transforms into a giant robot. Like, why did we not? It's one of those weird things where I can imagine at the time they probably looked and were just like, no, this is far too Japanese, this is far too localized. Whereas I think any kid anywhere in the world would be like, what, train robots? Sign me up. Like, fine, we got Astro Train, but what if you had more trains and they were cooler trains?
Yeah, so according to Chris McFeely's commentary track, these were characters very much exclusive to Japan and would not be seen in North America. Additional note, Andy, that he mentioned, I think I heard him say that this team is one of the last remnants of the Diaclone line to make it into Transformers.
Yeah, I think I recall, like, seeing some blog article where they showed, like, the original Diaclone versions of all these various characters, and yeah, these were on there as well, so that would figure.
So in terms of who are the Trainbots, just to kind of name check now, just so for when they no doubt become more prominent at some point. The team consists of, and I might mispronounce these names because they've not actually been name checked in the show yet, but we have Shoki, who is the leader and described by the TF Wiki as the brash speedster. We have Getsue, who is the sluggish stealth expert. that's a phrase. We have Kayen, or Kyan, I'm sure we'll learn how to pronounce that soon, the hot running powerhouse. Saizan, or Seizan, the rugged mountain climber. Suiken, the brainy strategist. And Yukikaze, the icy cold weather operative.
See, that's the train that we need in Scotland. That's what I'm saying. Bring Yukikaze to Glasgow right now.
And they combine to form the train super robot Raiden, or Raiden, however it's ultimately going to be pronounced, but I'm going to assume Raiden. So they add here, unsurprisingly, for locomotives, they can also combine into vehicle mode to produce a single super space train, and frequently act as interstellar transport for their fellow Autobots.
Yeah, it is the thing that I continue to find weird whenever we have, like, train stuff in Transformers, that they just do their train thing on the land, in the sky, wherever the heck they like. They don't need rails. It's like Astro Train sort of made more sense because he was also a spaceship, and it's like, well, fine, I guess you've got this whole thing going on. But with these guys, it's like, should you be allowed to do that? Like, this feels like you're a bit OP, but also you're train Transformers, so it's fine.
So, The train bots arrive, and this leads to all the Autobots now heading for the space bridge. But they are once again cut off by Six Shot. Ultra Magnus, then sends the train bots on while he, Prowl, and Sideswipe keep the Decepticons busy. The combined train bots, which, as we talked about, is a train, are attacked by the Constructicons, who shoot them out the sky, causing their transformation to come apart. Because, Andy, we can't have a new Combiner team debut without them immediately being pummeled and made to look silly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the downside of being a flying train. Where's the replacement bus service bots when you need them?
That's an idea there. We need that. But at this point, this is when Metroplex chooses to join the battle, and the Autobots then succeed in reaching Autobot City. I know what I just said, everyone. I'm just describing what I saw, okay? So just roll with me on that, no pun intended. And the Earth Space Bridge terminal as well, they have arrived at. So the troops are then carried through the space bridge aboard the train bots, and this is where Wheelie and Daniel stow away as well. We then cut back to Cybertron, where the battle is escalating and conditions? That's not a word. Conditions are worsening. That's a bad sentence. I'm not going to edit that out. I'm going to leave that in because that's how this goes, everybody. But Optimus Prime has now arrived with more troops to even things up for the Autobots. We then cut back to Athenia, where we find out that Prime's plan is to calibrate Vector Sigma. One would assume that basically means, Andy, to make it favour the Autobots again. And this is much to cut shock, because we find out, Andy, that Optimus Prime doesn't have the Matrix with him, so that he can activate Vector Sigma. Spike adds to this by saying that based on his research, Vector Sigma can't be controlled without the Matrix. Then, something appears on their long-range scanners. But what is it? The title of the episode may give you a clue, everyone. Back on Cybertron, the train bots have arrived, as did the stowed Wheelie and Daniel, with Daniel beelining it towards Vector Sigma to check on it. Because, I don't know, Daniel, you can control Vector Sigma, can't you? But that aside.
What could possibly go wrong from the boy who crashed like the entire archives of the Autobots?
But not before, Andy. They run into the Predacon, which I believe the name was Tantrum, if I've got my memory correct. And we have a small chase scene occur that rapidly ends by, quite literally, a train bot driving into the Predacon, and then Wheelie proceeding to jump on top of the Predacon and start pummeling his face in mercilessly.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that moment. That almost made Wheelie's appearance worth it, to be honest. So.
I agree completely. My note literally reads, "I almost like you, Wheelie." Back on Athenia, different pronunciations. I will say, everyone, you may notice how I'm going back on here, back on there, we now cut to there. This is very much the pacing of the show. And there is a narrator, who apparently, Andy, as well, is the narrator that basically carried on through the majority of, like, the G1 Transformers as well. So it is a constant through line. But this is just the pacing of the show, and there isn't necessarily time to let things breathe. They just want to get you to the next thing, and the narrator is very much filling in the gaps between scenes of little things that may have occurred. Occasionally, that happened in American G1, and we never got an explanation as to how something happened. So at the very least, we get a narrator to plug in those gaps.
Yeah, and this feels like a tried and trusted bit of kind of like Japanese anime storytelling, where they're always quite happy they're cramming a lot into a TV episode. If they need somebody to come in a voiceover and to be like, oh, by the way, this is what happened in the stuff you didn't really see, they will always happily do that. And yeah, it kind of it is preferable to the like, what the heck just happened? I feel like I missed an episode of this. Did I fall asleep? That you sometimes get with other shows.
So we're back on Athenia, where Spike, Carly, Cup, and Hot Rod. We'll come on to Hot Rod and how he's going to be named shortly, everyone, because that's going to be a confusing mess in itself. They're trying to figure out what they can do to help when Cup says, quote, "I remembered something from 4 million years ago. The fighting was terrible. Some of our citizens were under attack and managed to escape Cybertron." And as he's saying this, Andy, we get flashbacks involving Megatron, Starscream, Soundwave, Thundercracker, and Rumble attacking Cybertron. And then Cup adds, will such a tragedy be repeated? And then Spike cuts him off by saying, talking of the past isn't going to help solve our current problems. And then Cup just says, oh, forgive me.
Yeah, it's also, I was expecting when they cut back to that, I was expecting some stock footage from prior seasons, but that looked like new animation to me of
Agreed.
like the old school Decepticons, because it's like, surely you could have just paused. I mean, maybe there's a rights issue because different studios, but I was expecting them to just pull a classic bit of like season 1 and just be like, yeah, there you go, those guys. But it's like, oh no, you've animated new Megatron. This makes me quite happy.
Yeah, I will also note, according to Chris McFeely's commentary track, that is the only appearance we will ever see of those characters again.
Yeah, indeed. So Starscream's ghost continues to be accurate as a title.
At this point, the object that was on their long-range scanners is now closer to a point where they can magnify a picture to see it's actually a battleship. Blur, yes everyone, Blur is still here and talks just as fast in Japanese. I don't envy the subtitler of this, Andy, at all, but there you go. Blur immediately starts thinking this spells doom, but the others say, hey, it could be friendly, prompting Hot Rod, or Rodimus, as he's known in Japanese, and as the subtitles kind of flip-flop between as well, it should be said, prompting Rodimus to go check it out, leaving Cup in charge of that base. Back on Cybertron, the fighting continues, and we now see Superion, Defensor, and Abominus appear in combiner-based fighting action. We also see Blitzwing chasing, I think it was Sunstreaker, Andy, and then Blitzwing promptly then just flies into a building and bounces off of it.
Yeah. I mean, never really quite recovered from that leadership challenge in season 2, I guess. It's been all downhill for him since then. But also, I was very excited to see Sunstreaker. I don't know why that was like, yay! I like Sunstreaker. He's a cool yellow car.
Part of me just thought, I mean, this is probably again kind of the timeline issue that we're going to be on here. But part of me was thinking, wasn't Blitzwing exiled from the Decepticons? And I just thought, you know what? I'm not even going to worry.
Yeah, I mean, he probably made up with Galvatron at some point. You know, they probably just got together and went for ramen or something, and it was all fine.
It's like an episode of Naruto just sitting at the ramen shop after a long day. As the Decepticons approach their goal, we get to see the Headmasters holding some kind of grenades, I think, as a projectile weapon, and are just demolishing the Autobots that are standing in their way. Also, partly thanks to Mindwipe's sleep-inducing hypnosis power once again. Galvatron is smelling victory and is ready to get to Vector Sigma when a new voice is heard, saying, quote, Galvatron, think you can just carry it off, do you? End quote. Then, a big battleship appears from the sky, which we find out from an on-screen caption is named Battleship Maximus. Then 4 Transformers appear, with one specifically shouting the phrase, Transform! Head on! Weirdwolf immediately recognizes them, and we discover that they are in fact, quote, Headmaster Warriors, and they are led by Chrome Dome. There is also Hardhead, Highbrow, and Brainstorm. They are the Autobot equivalent of the Headmasters. Chrome Dome then challenges Weirdwolf to settle their conflict now, which he accepts. And the episode ends with more questions needing to be answered, but we've got a big battle on our hands, and things are getting exciting. So that is the end of the first episode of Headmasters, Andy, and I've got to say, for a debut episode, there was a lot to take in, and kind of a lot to try and figure out from our perspectives, obviously watching it from English language, going to Japanese, and all the continuity bits and whatnot. But as a debut episode, and as a long-time Transformers fan, I had a great time with this episode. It's a great debut episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it kind of ticks a lot of the boxes that you want it to tick. I mean, obviously, Headmasters are right there in the title, so you want to see those guys, and, you know, there's just enough to be like, cool, I like these characters, I like these character designs. It does some good stuff with the existing cast. You know, it sets up, I mean, literally within its first 30 seconds, it sets up the stakes like incredibly succinctly. Like Galvatron just turns up, basically turns the camera and says, "So this is the story," and it's like, well, you can't you can't question its effectiveness there. So yeah, it's good, and I mean, it's sort of the irony of having like the likes of Prowl and Jazz back. It's like, on one sense, this doesn't make sense, but on the other hand, these are all good characters, so I'm kind of glad that we've somehow managed to contrive a way to bring them back. So that's good. The thing that strikes me about this episode, though, is like just how disorganized the Autobots are. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, the G1 continuity to this point has always been to make the Autobots look good, almost without exception. Like, they always have the right plan and do the right thing. Whereas in this episode, it's basically like, oh, Optimus Prime has gone off without his phone, basically. And it's just like, oh, he's just gone without the Matrix to do the thing that he needs the Matrix for. He's left his car keys on the table, basically. And there's just this general, like, communication breakdown where you've got kind of like Cup and Spike and Prime's wandered off to do his thing, and it's just like, have you guys like not spoken to each other in the year like gap between the end of season 3 and this? Because they're all just like, oh I didn't know that, oh I didn't know that, and it sort of it feels quite weird compared to sort of the episodes we've had thus far, where the Autobots are always on the ball and just like do what they need to do to fix the problem. Whereas here they're just like, this is kind of what the Decepticons usually do, like being dysfunctional. And it's like, well, maybe this is what happens when you have two managers, like when you have like Rodimus and Optimus, and there's just this like communication breakdown. But I guess we'll get to that in due course.
Indeed, and there are, like you say, it does bring into question a lot of things that have or haven't occurred in the year since that season 3 finale, but it also did, I think, a pretty good job of setting the groundwork for things that the Autobots have done well in some ways. And I'm just glancing at the TF Wiki page here before we get onto some trivia notes, and one of the things that they actually note on here is that up to this point, the space bridge has been the province of the Decepticons alone, but this episode establishes that the Autobots have now created their own network because they've linked Autobot City on Earth to Cybertron and Athenia. So in terms of actually developing technology and stuff that I'm sure we said in past podcasts, why the heck can't the Autobots do that? They're now actually doing. So it's nice to see they have advanced a tad.
This is very true. And also we should note from this first episode that Slag is super adorable when he's sleepy. I thought he was very cute when he was just like lying down and just closing his eyes. It's like, oh, he's so cute. I want a sleepy Slag now.
I mean, hang on, there must be a toys inspired by this episode thing.
I mean, I suspect probably not, sadly. But we should also finally mention the end credits, which we've already alluded to, are just ridiculous and amazing. And I was not prepared for those.
There's one thing I told you. I said, wait for the end credits. Wait for them. And it is a wonderful song. I meant to actually look up who it was that performed it, because I can't find the name off the top of my head. But the concept of this closing sequence, is effectively, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be a train, and you see an image of like Spike and Daniel mimicking a train, and it's like, you can be a spaceship, and they just kind of, one of them jumps on their back and they just fly into the sky, and then it's like, be a helicopter, and then Spike just holds Daniel up in the air, spins him round, and goes flying. It's so wonderfully 80s dumb. It's so good.
Yeah, and again, I mean, compared to just, the end credits of every season of Transformers thus far has just been a relatively boring montage. And it's like, no, why did we not get this for every season? Why did we not get young Spike pretending to be Perceptor or something? I don't know. But like, yeah, I feel like we've been robbed of so much, but this was very rewarding.
So here we go, I found a page now. So, You Are a Transformer, or as it is in Japanese, Kiwi-wa Transformer, was the ending song for the Headmasters. It was sung by Hironobu Kageyama, who did the opening theme. And so it actually did both themes then, and was composed by Takamune Negishi, who has done... That's their only credit according to the TF Wiki, so there you go.
I mean, I mean, to be fair, if I did that, that would be the end of my career as well. I'd just retire and just say, no, I've peaked already. I'm done.
So, okay, look. Andy, I'm going to do something I wouldn't normally do here. I'm going to read some of the lyrics to this song.
I think we should.
So, oh my god, Andy, I'm just going to put this out here now. There's a TV size edit and there's a full version of this song.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, the trouble is, I feel like the song is good and all, but you need the animation as well. So unless they made a full video for the entire song, then you know.
I mean, there was a full-blown single release. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah,
so there is a CD single.
I need the version with the bonus VHS that has a full animated video to go with it. That's what I'm saying.
So the lyrics for the TV version are you ready? 3, 2, 1, 0. You can transform any way you want. Dash, accelerate like a supercar. That's basically how the song goes. Make the earth tremble like a tank. Taxi out and take off like a jet plane. Circle around, hovering like a helicopter. There's like, transform, you are a transformer. Would you like to hear some of the second verse lyrics?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the national anthem where nobody knows the second verse, so let's do this.
So there's another little bit sort of before we get back to the verse, but the other lyrics include, for the sake of justice, let's go, let's fight. You can transform how your rage burns. Then we get back to the verse now. Steam hissing away like an SL. SL is a steam locomotive, according to the page. Thank you for that, TF Wiki. Stepping heavily like a dinosaur. Cut through the darkness like a laser gun. Combining the sky like an aircraft carrier.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think you'd get arrested if you did that. So don't be too much of a transformer, would be my PSA.
So the steam locomotive is in relation to the train bot Cayenne. The dinosaur reference, obviously the Dinobots. Laser gun apparently is a reference for Six Shot.
Okay.
And aircraft carrier, as we'll get onto shortly, Andy, is going to be for Fortress Maximus.
Oh, okay. Yeah, poor Broadside. Has everyone forgotten Broadside? Remember Broadside?
It's funny you mention that, because I think he comes up in one of the trivia notes in a second I'm going to read.
Probably.
I seem to recall. Let me just find it now, actually. Hang on. So, the note, according to the TF Wiki, is this episode marks the first appearance of Broadside's final jet mode character model. The last time he was shown in jet mode, the animators used his pre-final mode, which had previously been used in the 1986 Triple Changer toy commercial.
Okay.
That's the note on Broadside. So, apparently Broadside's in here somewhere.
Yeah, there you go. There's our Broadside minute.
So, a couple of other random notes here. The name of the episode does differ in some places or territories. It's like 4 warriors from outer space, 4 soldiers from the sky, warriors from space. It kind of varies from place to place, but the Metrodome DVD, the UK DVD, if you will, that we're referring to, is 4 warriors from outer space. Or if you want to look at it in Spanish, Andy, Soldiers of the Past.
I mean, that's a completely different episode title. That doesn't even... Well, I don't know. Maybe it... No, it doesn't make sense. I was going to try and justify it. That just doesn't make sense. I'm not having it.
So, I feel the need to note here. There's just a note here about, like, the English localization. Six Shot refers to himself as a quote-unquote Phase 6 Decepticon officer on the Shout Factory American DVD instead of the original Decepticon Dino Base Ninja Commander. How many different variations of this title are we going to get?
Yeah, is this another, like, we can't use the word ninja in kids' cartoons moment, I guess? That's probably why it got changed to something far more boring.
I mean, this is Japan, Andy, so at that point, it's fair game, I think.
Yeah, but I guess if that was the Shout Factory version, they were probably leery about calling anyone a ninja in case they got into trouble, so...
I suppose at that point, they probably didn't have the license or the Super Sentai stuff that they do now, so...
True.
Additionally, the concept of Autobots fleeing Cybertron, which Cup alluded to, was first established in Desertion of the Dinobots Part 2 and revisited in Fight or Flee, both episodes from Season 2.
Yeah, that is true.
So there we go. I think that's probably going to just about do it for trivia notes and such like that, because there isn't a lot to say, partly because we've covered so much already when it comes to establishing this episode. But any additional thoughts, Andy, before we attempt to move on to the second episode here?
No, I mean, I will say, having mentioned kind of that prior, like, history of, like, you know, Autobots and Transformers, like, fleeing Cybertron, I think, I don't know, I'm kind of torn on whether I prefer, like, this as a Headmaster's origin story to what we got in the Rebirth. Like, I'm sort of torn on, like, what I prefer as an idea between, you know, what the Rebirth does and this. Because this feels like it has a lot more kind of depth to, like, the Headmaster's story of just like, oh no, they've been around for a long time. But, you know, I guess we can get into that as we get a bit more of that lore in these coming episodes.
Yeah, as this episode, in fact, I'll just say it now. The episode we're literally about to talk about, episode 2, Mystery of Planet Master. If there's one thing that this is going to establish is how vastly different the origin stories of the Headmasters concept is, because to briefly recap in my brain, and Andy, you might have to correct me here, because admittedly it's been a while since we last talked about Season 4, and now at this point my timelines are all messed up. But we have the Nebulons as a concept there, and them being the operators of the Autobots in Headmasters mode and such. And as we're about to find out, that's very different to what we're about to how it is portrayed and ultimately followed up on in Japan.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that maybe is less interesting with kind of this version of the story, because I mean, I don't know whether it's going to kind of do anything more with kind of the actual head characters in this series, because yeah, like, you know, they were very distinct. You know, they were humanoid with you know, humanoid personalities, whereas here the intimation is that they're not going to be, and that they're just little robots. So yeah, I'm sort of that is not really established entirely in these episodes, but that seems to be what I'm getting out of it, which is maybe a little bit less interesting. And again, I mean, that kind of goes against all the continuity of the toys, from what I remember, of like their tech specs and bios, which is kind of interesting. So maybe those were sort of like placed a little differently in Japan, but yeah, we shall get into some of this lore in due course, I guess.
So episode 2 begins with the respective Headmaster teams fighting each other, and we get our first glimpse of how the Headmasters operate in this series, as we've just been discussing it, compared to the US Rebirth version, as the head of Weirdwolf transforms into a mini robot, then jumps in a cockpit contained in the remainder of his larger body, which then transforms into its respective animal/vehicle form, depending which Headmaster it is, and they pilot it accordingly. We see the other Headmasters from both sides do this as well. So, to expand on this point, Andy, the TF Wiki notes, specifically on the character page for Weirdwolf, but I thought this was a good sort of point of origin, as it were, to make a note of this. In Japan, Weirdwolf is a small robot who transforms into a head and controls a larger, lifeless transector body, as it's phrased. The Headmaster's toy line referred to the small robot as Monzo, with Weirdwolf being the name of the combined small robot/transector form. Though this distinction of nomenclature, I think I pronounced that right, I haven't said that word in a while, is very rarely made in fiction, and he is normally referred to as Weirdwolf regardless of whatever form he takes. So when it comes to actually referring to them either way, they are still just called whatever they are called. It doesn't mean they're now just two different names and such.
Yeah, but no, I mean, it's particularly notable what they show with Weirdwolf here, because it is very clearly based on the toy, because as somebody who owned the Weirdwolf toy, because he's
really
awesome. Yeah, Weirdwolf is amazing. Like, it's probably one of my favorite Transformers. Watching this episode almost made me want to bust out my box of Transformers to find Weirdwolf, because it's like, oh, I love that guy so much. But yeah, like, that's how the toy works, is, you know, there's a little kind of plastic cockpit that you could open up, and you slotted Bonza, whatever his name was, inside, and that was kind of how that worked. So that side definitely felt like it's very much a, like, we've designed these characters based strictly on the toys. And again, I mean, one thing that this does that I think I mentioned to you during the Rebirth episodes, where, you know, one of the gimmicks with the toys was that when you plug the head in, it shows their tech specs on their chest, and these episodes very explicitly do that, to kind of show that side of it off, which like the Rebirth episodes did not. But yeah, it's just more that sort of weird thing of like you say, it's kind of like, okay, like the head is the robot and the rest of it's just like a lifeless thing, which is very different to what the sort of the US continuity was going for, of like, no, it's this symbiotic relationship between Transformer and flesh creature, basically.
Great phrase. So as the battle between the newly arrived Autobot Headmasters and Decepticon counterparts rages on Cybertron, Daniel, Wheelie, and others observe from the distant base on Athenia. Daniel, for one, is impressed by the newcomers, but Wheelie's reaction to Daniel is that he's always impressed by things like that, so what's the difference? Elsewhere, Galvatron transforms into his cannon mode and blasts at Optimus Prime, knocking the Autobot leader down, but Hot Rod retaliates and Galvatron is forced back. Optimus then decides to leave the others to it to go check on Vector Sigma. In another part of the battle, the Autobot Combiners face off against the Decepticon Combiners. The Autobots are left scrambling for cover when a shot from Bruticus brings down a nearby building. And that's not mincing words there. People were getting crushed, Andy, we saw in some footage.
Yeah,
and by people, I mean robots.
Yeah. I mean, this is again. We will very much get into this in future, but again, we are continuing down the sort of the dark Transformers timeline where bad things happen to people / robots / characters. Which, yeah, this series again, perhaps unsurprisingly, given, you know, Japan is generally less churlish about these things, but yeah, stuff happens in this story.
As the Athenia base watches on, we are now formally introduced to Fortress, who, I'll note now, in the context of Headmasters, it's its own Transformer that pilots the battleship Maximus. And in fact, we come to find out he is just outright the leader of the Autobot Headmasters. And to further expand on this, Andy, when it comes to the naming convention that's referred to, that Fortress is known by when in the subtitles and such, Chris McFeely in his commentary track that I watched on the DVD noted that Fortress in the American cartoon is the head Cerebros that kind of then powers everything else with Fortress Maximus. But in the context of Headmasters, Fortress is very much its own entity and its own character. So for the purposes of naming and subtitling, rather than perhaps trying to call him Cerebros or something else, they just decided, no, keep it Fortress, because Fortress is very much its own thing. So that is why that it is named in such a way in the subtitles.
Yeah, I honestly kind of like it that way, that you've got Fortress and Maximus, and then you put them both together and you get Fortress Maximus. That's a lot easier than remembering Cerebros and blah blah blah. So yeah, I think I'm with this. I'm on board with this decision.
I agree. Also, Fortress is cool, just in general.
I mean, who wouldn't want to be called Fortress? Quite honestly, I might by this next episode, you might have to introduce me as Fortress, and I'm just going to change my name by deed, Paul. It'll be my new name.
Fortress Hanley.
Yeah, my middle name will be Trainbot. But...
Fortress Trainbot Hanley. So, Fortress brings his battleship Maximus into range and starts firing on the Decepticons. And with the Combiners down and under heavy fire, Galvatron calls for a retreat. So if you had that on your bingo card, everyone, you can tick that now. That said, though, nothing like what we've seen in the American cartoon. Just very much like, right, we're done, let's go. Let's pull back.
Yeah, straight to the point.
The battle is over, and Hot Rod invites the Autobot Headmasters, including Fortress, back to Athenia. Cup recognizes Fortress, and it turns out he is an old friend of his from Cybertron, and we get a fun small reunion between the two. Cup going on to say, quote, "He's an old friend of mine. Fortress was born on Cybertron like all of you." This leads to a flashback sequence with lots of images of war accompanying it and such. Fortress saying, quote, At that time, Cybertron was engulfed in the flames of conflict. My people had inferior physical strength and transformation skills. We simply trembled in fear. I was appointed to lead the citizens. We fled Cybertron and headed for the peaceful planet Master. It's difficult to say that in that way, but that is how it is. The planet is called Master. Just putting that out there, everybody. To continue. We arrived on planet Master and spent years rebuilding our civilization. Through our own unique evolution, we honed our skills to transform. At first, we transformed our heads and then assimilated them onto super bodies. That is the history of the Headmasters. Quote. I do feel there's a bit of detail missing there. It feels like we were missing a pretty crucial part of it there, but I'm assuming that's going to be a plot device that will be expanded on later in the show.
Yeah, and it's a good solid kind of grounding for how all that went down, and also weirdly sort of ties into like the Rebirth version where, you know, Cerebros was sort of a pacifist and didn't want to be involved in the fighting. It feels like, again, they've taken the broad character bio and just taken it in a different direction that actually works pretty well, of just like, okay, yeah, you were just real scrawny, so you went to another planet to get buff, and avoid the fighting, and it's like, and boy did he get buff, because now he's Fortress Maximus. It should be some kind of like Cybertron like diet and workout like side by side image, like before and after.
Buy the workout video now.
Yeah, like this was me 90 days ago. This is me now. No, I really like it as a plot point. And yeah, that's quite nice. And also, actually, like good use for Cup and his like being old, of just like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. Like eventually, it's like, I'm sure I've seen you before, and then finally we get there. So yeah, no, I liked all of this bit.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's also highlighted that the Autobots and Transformers, more to a point, can evolve in that way. Because it's clear that they had to rebuild the civilization. They probably had to adjust to whatever planet Master is like. Which, who knows if we'll actually ever see it properly. We saw like some glimpses of it in the flashback, but it'll be interesting to see if that's a direction they go in long term in the show.
Yeah, and again, I mean, that ties in a sense right the way back to the start of G1, and the whole reason that the Transformers all have like, you know, Earth vehicle modes is that it was kind of an evolution, because, you know, they had to blend into their surroundings. So yeah, it's sort of, it would make sense by extension that Transformers that went to other planets would probably do similar things to evolve and, you know, adjust to their circumstances. So yeah, like shockingly, everything makes sense for once in Transformers. So I'll take it.
To elaborate a little bit more on Fortress's flashback, other imagery that we see accompanying what he is telling us is that the planet that they fled to. We see computer schematics of the evolution on screen as well. And when head mode is initiated, as it's phrased, and there's this, obviously you mentioned it already, Andy, but when the heads sort of attach or whatnot, and they go into head-on mode and such, you actually get to see the tech specs, which specifically highlight their speed, strength, and I believe it's intelligence, because that's the only thing I could think that INT would be.
Yeah, no, it's not their like internal fortitude or something. No, intelligence it is.
Internal temperature.
yeah, so something real hot, apparently.
Fortress then continues to say, quote, however, many tragic events have happened. A sect of evil headmasters rebelled against us. Their leader was called Zarak. I'll come back to the name of Zarak in a second, Andy, because I know there's going to be something we're going to have to discuss there for a second. We fought to banish them from Planet Master. Zarak and his group of outlaws went on the rampage, attacking other peaceful planets. They developed brutal and magical skills. Zarak then forged links with the Decepticons. We have come to battle against these enemies. So I like the fact that we've established already what the likely big villain of the show is going to be. But there's, from the perspective, Andy, of comparing it to the Rebirth trilogy and this, there is a notable difference in that Zarak, let me get my brain in gear here. Zarak was the leader of the bad Nebulons that ultimately created Scorponok. Whereas in the context of this, well, what's the way to phrase this? So, okay. In the Japanese dialogue, Zarak and Scorponok are flipped. So, the actual, what we hear the dialogue saying when they're referring to Zarak is Scorponok. Which then, no doubt, will mean later in the show, when there is the actual Zarak, as it were, we're gonna be seeing it in the subtitles as Scorponok. It's gonna be one of those weird things we're gonna have to get around in our head canon. But essentially, that's how it is. But for the purposes of the actual episodes in the script, they decided to keep with the English naming convention because it has technically already been established to an English-speaking audience.
Yeah, I think it would have been more confusing to do it any other way. So it makes sense. We'll work it out as we go, I'm sure.
Indeed. So the reason I say that now, everyone, is because if we suddenly say Scorponok, we mean Zarak. Yeah. I'm giving us a get out of jail free there, Andy, now.
Yeah, and to be honest, I just like to say Scorponok a lot because it's a really good name. So, maybe I'll change my name to Scorponok, actually, now I think about it.
So Fortress Trainbot Scorponok Hanley.
Yeah, this is getting complicated.
You try remembering it, mate. Like, I'm going to keep doing this each time now. It's going to get longer and longer each time. Back to the story. We then see Optimus Prime heading towards Vector Sigma, but encounters something I didn't think we were ever going to see again, Andy, the Centurion droids that we saw utterly muller the Autobots in the Key to Vector Sigma 2-part story in Season 2. That said, they completely got mullered by Prime, and even now had voices because they screamed in terror as they were pushed off a bridge.
Yeah. Again, this episode does have some moments of Optimus Prime doing very un-Optimus Prime things. Like, I don't have a problem quite so much with the Centurion robots, but there are definitely some sentient beings that do not enjoy the freedom that Optimus Prime purports to offer them during this kind of sequence of him getting to Vector Sigma, is all I'm saying.
I like the fact, and it's something we've not actually touched on yet, but based on like the battles that we've seen so far, the big thing about Season 3 was the big tonal shift, almost kind of the maturity in some ways of the story, and kind of how it was a lot darker in tone. And in hindsight, when you look at Daniel and Wheelie, in many ways they were kind of the light relief of the show, especially in those couple of episodes where they were the focal point. It was very much a big tonal shift in that sense. I like the fact we're almost getting a bit more direct how you would expect fighting and battling happening. Because when's the last time you saw Optimus Prime basically throw a giant karate kick off a building? Like, that happens across these 3 episodes we're talking about, and it's a great visual. Yeah,
and again, I think that's the nice stuff about the action scenes in these episodes, is it's not just the... I mean, we talked about this with, prior seasons where the action sometimes just descends into just pew-pew lasers from a distance, and that's fine up to a limit, but, like, the series was always better with its action scenes when it was a bit more close combat and really getting, down and dirty with it effectively. And I think, again, because of the animation style and the people involved in this, there's a lot more of the kind of hand-to-hand or foot-to-face stuff with these episodes, and that just makes it feel a bit more kinetic and a bit more physical than just, like, it's not always just relying on guns. So that is quite pleasing to see.
But suddenly, after Prime has got rid of the Centurion droids, a ghostly figure appears. It's a very familiar one, Andy, because it's only Alpha frickin' Trion, to which Prime's reaction is to be confused at what's in front of him. Which is like, oh, that's nice. You forgot who he was, did you?
I mean, to be fair, Optimus Prime has been through some things since the last time they met. So, I mean, it's... I can understand him maybe having some issues there.
And Prime even goes so far as to say is, like, who are you? And then moments later, knows exactly who he is. And then Alpha Trion actually assists him by telling him, look out behind you, as one of the other Centurion droids was lurking, and Prime just mullers him. The narrator also describes Alpha Trion as, quote-unquote, the original first commander of the Autobots and the creator of Optimus Prime. I like the fact they've acknowledged the original first commander, because we did see that in one of the time-traveling flashback episodes that occurred. I think it was in Season 3, where we saw, like, the young Alpha Trion. I seem to recall. I can't remember who the combiner team was. It was the one where there was the big picture. It was probably the aerial bots. They're not time traveling.
I think that was all the aerial bot stuff was was that. But yeah. I mean, again, decent use of the narrator just to fill in the gaps for people who've not been doing a podcast watching all of G1 in short order.
As the episode continues, we see Trion's ghost accompany Prime as he makes his way through all sorts of defenses and traps that we've never seen before in the show when it comes to trying to get to their destination, and Prime is taking some damage along the way as well. We then cut back to Athenia, where Fortress is surprised to hear, much like everyone at this point, that Optimus Prime has not taken the Matrix with him. It's been left on Earth to recharge, or as Rodimus puts it, for collecting and storing any released energy. So this is another thing we should touch on briefly here, Andy. And I appreciate there's a lot of deviation here, folks, but it's to kind of just set the scene and establish it. And it's something that Chris McFeely did mention in the commentary track as well when I saw it. In that the Matrix is treated almost as its own energy source, or as a source of energy in the Japanese continuity. And so the idea that effectively you can plug it in and put it on charge is not something we ever thought we'd see. But then we never thought the energy of the Matrix would be released in the way it would be to cure the entire universe, quite frankly. So it makes sense to a point, but the idea it can just recharge somewhere is a little bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, it was... Again, it would have been really fascinating to have got like a full-blown season 4 of the US continuity to see how they were going to handle that, because I mean, I think we talked about it at the time of like, you know, the Matrix becomes this big important centerpiece of all things Transformers, and suddenly you're like, oh, it's the battery's flat. Like, you know, it felt like season 4 was going to have to be a big sort of quest to find a way to recharge it, whereas yeah, like the Japanese solution to that problem is just like, well, plug it in and leave it at home for a bit, it'll be fine. I'd
like to know how much wisdom it gets by doing that.
Yeah. who can say? But yeah, it's sort of, it's kind of interesting but functional, I guess. I mean, the whole Matrix concept is such a mess by this point because we've got like Rodimus and Optimus here, and Rodimus is Hot Rod because he doesn't have the Matrix, but Optimus Prime is still Optimus Prime even though he's left the Matrix at home, like, you know, on the shelf. So there's a lot that doesn't necessarily make sense about it at this point. So I think we just have to go with it and just be like, oh, okay, whatever you say.
It's one of those things, Andy, where we have to bring back our phrase of Unicron magic.
Yeah, pretty much. Or like
actually, wait, does Unicron exist in this universe now?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that I guess.
Oh no, what have I just said?
I mean, I guess he was around in enough of season 3 that he still exists in this continuity, which that must have taken some explaining when they made like the season 3 version of this. Is like, oh yeah, there's a big giant robot head that's orbiting our Cybertron. There's a whole thing. It's like, you know, because I mean, the number of episodes in season 3 that are just like, let's go hang out at Unicron's head, and that would be really bizarre if you'd never seen the movie, because you're just like, what the heck, what's going on here?
How do they explain that Starscream is dead and wants to go back to Unicron's head?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, that none of that really makes sense. Also, by the way, do we need to rename this podcast Alpha Trion's Ghost now? Like, is that do we need to consider this
Trion's Ghost? We'll think about that, I guess. We'll see how many more ghosts we get in this show, because it wouldn't surprise me if we get loads of them, quite frankly.
Yeah, possibly.
So back to the story. Fortress believes that Optimus will need the Matrix to control Vector Sigma, explaining it's, quote-unquote, the mother computer of Cybertron. It equally supports both Autobots and Decepticons. Until now, the Matrix has used its wisdom and power to control Vector Sigma and shut down any external influence from the Decepticons, quote. That makes sense. It also feels like that's now going against the grain of the story a little bit, in my opinion. I'm not sure if you agree.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's broadly headed in the same direction. I mean, it's gotten a little confusing at this point because so many people have like opined their thoughts on like how Vector Sigma works and what it does and what's going on with it, that it's like I feel like I've lost a little bit of the thread for what the speculation is and what the actual fact is. But I guess I'll take Ghost Alpha Trion Man's opinions over hounds or Galvatrons. So sure, we'll run with his. We'll run with his version. This is like there's probably like some like Cybertron version of Wikipedia that has a whole bunch of edits where it's just like Hound versus Alphatron versus Galvatron, just constantly editing the page, being like, no, actually it works like this, and it's like, no, this page is contended.
And eventually the page just gets locked. You can't edit it now.
Yeah, but just like, stop it, guys. We need to figure this out.
But either way, the crux of the story that is most important is that Vector Sigma is basically an all-empowering influence on Cybertron. So whoever effectively gets Vector Sigma's, for want of a better word, approval, gets the entire influence. That's the crux of it here. But to do it, you need the Matrix. So there you go.
Yeah. Which kind of, I mean, given what we know about how Decepticons can't use the Matrix, like that seems like that's inherently biased if it's supposedly like an unbiased system, because like we saw Scourge try to use the Matrix and it did not end well. And you know,
he had a
like,
bad day.
Yeah, and like Unicron likewise had a pretty bad time with the Matrix. Like Galvatron couldn't open the thing because, you know, I don't know, he didn't bring the right tool to open it up or whatever. So it just seems like that is inherently, if you need the Matrix to use Vector Sigma, then it is inherently an Autobot thing. But, you know, plot holes. We move on.
Everyone continues to wonder why Prime didn't take it with him. Cup suspecting that Prime is willing to risk his own life. Fortress agrees. Hot Rod attempts to communicate with Optimus. As it turns out, only Optimus knows where the Matrix is hidden on Earth. But of course, can't get hold of him.
Yeah, because he left his phone at home as well. I mean, this is again, this is just like terrible management of like, you know, there's a thing that you might need to know while I'm gone, but I've not told anybody. Like, you know, it's all on my laptop, but I'm not giving you the password to my laptop. It's like, yeah, I know. I feel like this puts Optimus in a very bad light. Like, he should really have sorted this stuff out before he went off on his quest to fix Vector Sigma.
Hot Rod decides to head to Earth. With accompanying him is Blaster, and they're going to go by the space bridge to go hunt for the Matrix. He also definitively, I should say Hot Rod here, and this is, I'm just going to telegraph this a little bit now, Andy, but you immediately knew what was going to happen when this was said. Because Hot Rod definitively promises to Daniel he will find the Matrix and save Prime. I immediately thought, one of those two things is going to happen. You can't do both. We've seen what you're like.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, at least this season gives us like a Hot Rod / Rodimus that is more comfortable with his position. Whether that will continue, like we will see, but he's not quite as racked with problems before. Also, I can't remember exactly what this is in relation to, but I think it was about this point in the episode. All I've written in my notes is like, seriously, Wheelie is such a jerk.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because I wanted to mention this as well, but I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, and I think because he's just like, I mean, I noted that like at the start of this episode, he's been very much that, well, actually, guide to everybody whenever anyone's trying to explain anything. But then he's just like, he's being a bit of more than a bit of an ass to all of the Autobot headmasters. And it's just like, for no particular reason. And it's like, just shut up, Wheelie. Like, you had your moment where we almost liked you, but now I definitely don't like you again. So please be quiet.
This is me throwing my own headcanon in now. I think it's because he's learned how to not talk in rhyme. So now he feels he's just got free reign to talk however he wants and can just impart his wisdom however he sees fit. And this is kind of going back to how Daniel was kind of talking, and I was about to say operating, but I'm going to say conducting himself because he's not a robot. But it almost is that element of just immaturity. And it's just that coming out. It's almost like he's a teenager and kind of going through a teenage phase.
Yeah, and I think that is genuinely what this episode is going for, but doesn't make him any less of a jerk. So
No, you're not wrong at all. You're not wrong. So, what's going to happen, everybody? If you don't already know, you'll find out soon. Now, going back to Wheelie, actually, Andy, this actually furthers the point you were going to say. Originally, Chrome Dome offers to accompany Hot Rod, but Wheelie takes great exception to this, saying that he will just be a burden to Rodimus as the Headmasters don't know Earth all that well. And Blaster quells the situation by telling Wheelie to listen to some music and gives him a cassette from his tape deck.
Yeah, I want to know what's on that cassette. I'm very disappointed that they didn't name check. Like they could have got maybe it's the ending theme to this show. Maybe.
I mean, mate, we see at the end of the episode.
Do we?
Yep, we do.
Okay, well, I didn't pay attention to that.
You were too busy writing notes at that point.
Well, I was too busy mourning, to be honest. But we'll get to that.
So no sooner have the pair reached Earth and are in Autobot City. What happened, Andy? If on your Transformers bingo card you had Decepticon infiltration, you can check that off now because Blaster sees Rat-Bat hanging on the wall as a cassette tape and is spying on them. Rat-Bat flees and Blaster sends Steeljaw after him. Rat-Bat basically leads the Autobots to a storeroom still inside the base where Soundwave is also hiding. And we get a fun, brief battle that involves basically all the cassette Transformers just exchanging fire and whatnot. And we even see freaking Ravage making an appearance. This scene, Andy, was great.
It was great. Like, it made up for my question of, like, why did Soundwave go inside as well? Because surely when you've got your, like, spy cassette tapes, you wait outside for them. You don't just be like, oh, well, I guess I'll just infiltrate as well, even though I'm a whacking great robot. But it was worth it because, yeah, it was very cool. And I was all set up after this scene of, like, oh, are we going to have, like, a season-long, like, ding-dong between Blaster and Soundwave? Spoilers, we are not. But this was good.
So just laughing at the way you said that, sorry. But one of my favourite parts of this as well is the way it ends, because Soundwave just drops a smoke bomb and escapes, but not before telling Blaster, I'll get you soon. Also, Soundwave's voice in Japanese sounds really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's not like I miss like the classic like US voice and the modulation of it, but it's still a good voice for sure.
We then see Soundwave and Six-Shot relaying the information that they have discovered to Galvatron, and they are ordered to find out why the heck is Hot Rod on Earth. The Autobots then pinpoint likely locations that the Matrix will be hidden and begin searching. Now, another detail added here, Andy, in just casually in passing in the dialogue, is that the Matrix needs a colossal amount of pure energy. In the context of it being in a wall charger, what is pure energy?
I guess. Yeah, probably needs some kind of special adapter or something.
So, Six-Shot and Soundwave spot the Autobots heading for a cache of Decepticon Energon in the desert, and send the Stunticons, because again everyone, combiners are a thing here, and it's great for it, to intercept them. Meanwhile, Hot Rod and Blaster go to the Arctic. When Soundwave spots the two there, Galvatron orders him to go intercept. The two Autobots have already run into trouble though, because the Predacons are waiting for them. In what I think is one of my favourite moments of battling ever, Andy, I think, in the context of Transformers. The Predacons attempt to merge into Predaking. And we've seen various ways that transformations can be disrupted or ultimately broken apart. I don't think we've ever seen an Autobot just transform into their car and drive through the middle of them all trying to combine. That was the best thing.
Yeah, and it makes sense, really, when you think about it. I mean, they should probably have done that on the multitude of other times where combiner teams have combined to stop them doing that. But yeah, there's some really good stuff with like Hot Rod in his car mode in general in this. Like it's one of those weird things where I think Transformers hasn't always done enough with the vehicle modes of various characters. And this is a good example of that, where it's like, oh yeah, like you can do some real cool stuff, especially with like Hot Rod, because you know he's a hot rod, he's a sports car, and so like you know you can get a good feel for like you know the speed and maneuverability and getting to do stuff like that, and it's like yeah, this is good fun that you can actually make use of that, and it's not always like all the fighting doesn't have to be in robot mode.
But after that wonderful failed transformation moment, Menasor then arrives, continuing with the Combiner theme here. Superion, again continuing with the Combiner theme, then turns up and keeps the Decepticon Combiner busy, but not before Menasor teases using Hot Rod as a shield while he is still transformed as a car. Why have we never seen this before?
Yeah, and why does Hot Rod not just transform into his robot mode to escape? More importantly, it's like, oh yeah, I guess I'll just be a shield then. It's like, you could just transform back, surely, and that would give you more stuff you could do. Because especially, again, I guess the movie didn't happen in Japanese continuity, but like, you know, when he gets grabbed by the giant octopus thing, like, you know, he transforms into his robot mode so he can shoot with his exhaust laser gun things, and it's like, well, you could just do that to Menasor and that would probably, you know, make him drop you, but maybe that's why I'm not an Autobot leader. I don't know.
Soundwave and his cassettes then arrive to pick off Hot Rod, but Blaster is now on show and his team leap into the rescue. Soundwave then declares, quote unquote, "Blaster, let's finish this now," culminating in a one-on-one battle between the two communicators that sees them simultaneously punching each other through their respective chests / tape deck housing, if you will. Soundwave's arm gets knocked off. This is just a proper good punch-up. There's a proper great, like, wrestling elbow drop from Blaster at one point from the side of a mountain. It's great! But ultimately, Soundwave falls. Well, explodes, quite literally. Which Galvatron, watching on a monitor, proper screams in pain about. Effectively just going, Soundwave!
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, these are the guys that were holding hands, like, not that long ago. I mean, you know, there is clearly some quite the deep bromance going on there at the very least. So I genuinely actually a little bit touched by that moment, given all of that. I was like, oh no, I actually feel sorry for Galvatron for once. It's like, it's poor guy. Like, you know, yeah, I mean, I feel like they missed an opportunity to do a full-blown, like, kind of montage to some, like, sad love song of just, like, all the moments that Soundwave and Megatron / Galvatron were together in the show, including the hand-holding. Just, like, you know, I'll remember you forever, Soundwave. And
or did we get, like, a little montage?
Yeah, exactly. You get all of that, but no, we didn't get that. But Galvatron very upset, and understandably so. As was I. Like, Soundwave is also cool, so it's like, you can't. I mean, clearly Transformers can kill characters whenever the hell it likes at this point, but still, Soundwave, I don't know. And also, going too deep on this now, but what happens to all the cassette tapes? Like, are they just homeless now?
I know, right?
Like,
that's what I thought.
Where do they live, or do they die with him? I mean, that's kind of dark, but like, how does all this work? Like, this is unprecedented, you know. We're treading new ground here, and I have a lot of questions.
The thing is, though, it's especially for like we've both said it, Soundwave's one of our favourites ever. This is a big deal for like child brain us, as it were.
Yeah.
Like one of our favourite characters we've literally just seen explode, not even just turn grey, just explode.
Yeah, and I mean, this is episode 2 of the series. I mean, you know, because I knew that this happened. I'd seen the clips, but I always assumed this was like right near like the end of the series or something, where they're like, right, we're done with Soundwave, we're gonna kill him off. But no, 2 episodes in, I was not prepared for this. And yeah, like, you know, I just want to know who's gonna rewind Laserbeak when somebody plays him. That's all I need to know. I just need to know Laserbeak is okay and will be rewound properly. Not using a pencil. Is there a pencil transformer that's just going to have to like rewind him manually now? Is that how this is going to go down? I don't know.
Is the pencil transformer just going to be called Lead?
I mean, that's a pretty good name for a transformer, to be fair.
But Andy, that's not the only death that happens at this point.
Not.
Because as Hot Rod goes to help Blaster, he falls to the ground and turns grey, with his cassettes and Hot Rod around him. But Blaster's final words were him wanting Hot Rod to protect Prime. And at that point, Steeljaw is instructed by Hot Rod to take care of this situation, which I felt was a little bit harsh given the moment. But I understand, Hot Rod. You gotta do your thing. Because Hot Rod goes to continue looking for the Matrix. And the last thing we see in this scene is Laserbeak and Buzzsaw. Yes, Buzzsaw, everyone. Both of, like, the flying cassette tapes retrieve parts of Soundwave. Laserbeak specifically grabbing the head of Soundwave and flying away. Holy crap, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, it all... There's a lot there. Like, it all got very dark. And in ways that I really appreciate, to be honest. Like, the workman-like version of, like, you know... Even and this is Hot Rod being Hot Rod, not even Hot Rod as Rodimus, which is sort of a slightly weird kind of character thing. Just being like, no, we just got to get on with this. Like, you know, we're in a war. This is terrible, but let's just deal with this and move on. And then, yeah, like, I don't know, retrieving Soundwave's head seems a little bit weird, but I guess, I don't know, Galvatron can give him a decent burial or something, I suppose. But yeah, like, you've just killed two kind of beloved characters who have been regulars in this show from like day one. Well, day one in Soundwave's case, like season 2 in Blasters, or broadcast, as I notice he's called in the Japanese, which is actually, I think that might be a better name.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like it just sounds really good. But yeah, you've just killed these two characters in like no time at all. And it's like, oh, okay, Jesus. It's like, it's again weirdly fits in with like the movie continuity that Japan never got to see, of just like, yep, this is what happens when Transformers fight seriously. Then, you know, they die, and here we are.
There is a weird parallel in some ways, in that there are obviously some glaring things that wouldn't make this totally work, but parts of what we've seen in these 2 episodes could actually make for a movie replacement to actually make the continuity work, leading into Season 3. As dumb as it sounds. Or Season 3 never happened sort of thing. There are elements of it that obviously there's a lot that can't work, like the introduction of so many combiners and whatnot, but there are elements of it where you think, if this hadn't happened but this had, that would have been pretty damn awesome.
Yeah. I mean, they could certainly... You know, their body count is getting up there with the movie already, so you know they're definitely on that trajectory, and they're not done yet. So.
Back on Athenia, the Autobots react with sorrow to Blaster's death. Wheelie begins playing the tape that Blaster left for him, and it's kind of just some like almost classical style music, which is almost even worse. It's like, oh no, don't do this to me. I mean, it's like Blaster knew.
Well, yeah, it also just sounds like Blaster was trolling Wheelie, of just like, oh yeah, I'll give you some music to listen to. It's like, here you go, you have some Mozart. Like, cause
he's expecting some
like...
funk or something, and instead he gets that.
Like he was probably there for some like, I don't know, the new Coolio album or something, and it's like, oh no, you've given me classical music again. So yeah, Blaster had the last laugh, as it turns out. But once again, Daniel really needs a therapist at this point, because he's been repeatedly traumatized. I mean, he's learned far more about death than any like 7 to 10-year-old should in like the course of like a couple of years. And it's like, please, somebody like help this child.
He went through Dark Awakening and everything involving Zombie Prime, you know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he has been through a lot, like, you know, notwithstanding blowing up the entire Autobot archive, which I will never not bring up when we're talking about Daniel. But yeah, like, God, it's another one. Yeah, tough times for Daniel.
It's at this point that Chrome Dome announces that the Headmasters have to go to Earth to help Hot Rod. And after the stuff he said earlier about them just being a burden, Wheelie simply responds by looking at Chrome Dome and saying that they're depending on them, and the two shake hands. Wheelie has grown up just a tad. The episode concludes with visuals of Prime still making his way to Vector Sigma, and Hot Rod driving across the Arctic. And that is how episode 2 of Headmasters ends. Holy cow, Andy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is where we can peek behind the curtain here. That our original thought was we were just going to do 2 episodes on this, and then I was basically like texted you to be like, "We've got to do 3 episodes, Jeremy. We can't just leave it here. I'm watching episode 3 whether you like it or not." And then I did.
But this is one thing we've not actually really spoken about yet, but already this emphasizes very much. This is a very much anime thing that happens. But even just from these 2 episodes, aside from the Ultimate Doom, we never got a continuous flowing through story, just evolving ever so slightly in each episode for more than maybe 2 episodes. And you already know that this is going to be a big, long, I think it's 35 episodes in the end this season. And the story's just going to keep going and building. This is great. I'm loving this so much.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that goes, because obviously, like, these first 3 episodes are kind of their own little arc, and I'm sort of interested to see how much of it kind of sticks with, you know, a broader narrative, and how much of it, because I assume at least some of it is going to be more sort of individual stories. But yeah, this is definitely a really good arc. You know, it does that smart thing of it has, you know, because it splits out things into a few different locations, it has quite a lot going on to kind of keep things fresh in different places, so you can always just switch from one to the other, and so it has a lot going to keep it interesting, and then yeah, it just, you know, has some good action, kills a couple of characters. Like, what more could you ask for?
So from there we venture to the TF Wiki to see some trivia notes, or perhaps some things we may have missed that is worth noting. First of all, Andy, something we haven't actually touched on, but I think it's worth mentioning. Steeljaw can talk.
Yeah, that's weird.
Although his fellow animal cassettes, the TF Wiki notes, Ramhorn, previously talked in Forever is a Long Time Coming, Steeljaw never indicated he had the gift of gab until now.
Yeah, it makes you wonder whether, like, Ravage and Laserbeak can talk and just choose not to, because if Steeljaw can, then surely they all can. But yeah, that's kind of bizarre, but hey-ho.
In this episode, we get the first appearance of the combined train bots of Raiden/Raiden, however we eventually figure out to pronounce it. That is the first episode, although it's nothing more than an extremely short cameo, as he's forced to run off thanks to Bruticus. Once again, the debut of a combiner form cannot win.
Yeah.
The TF Wiki says that people who haven't seen it think the fight between Blaster and Soundwave is awesome. It's really not.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I disagree with that personally. But, my god, okay. In the English dub for this episode, Steeljaw is shockingly unaffected by Blaster's death. After Blaster's tragic last words, and I think after Hot Rod has kind of said, "Can you take care of the situation?" apparently Steeljaw's response is a cheery, "Alright, Chief!" after Rodimus tells him to do that.
Well, I mean, I guess if you've been just trapped inside Blaster for all those years and probably had classical music recorded onto you against your will, maybe he was quite happy to be freed. That's all I can think.
So a couple of sort of subtitle notes here. So in the Shout Factory subtitles, a Blaster refers to his mini cassettes as deployers when noting their sensors. This term is consistently used in their translation. Interesting. In the original, the energy on Earth that was being used to recharge the Matrix was left unspecified, but Shout Factory subtitles have it to be plasma energy specifically.
Yeah, I mean, we've had plasma energy kicking around in Transformers before, so makes sense.
Also, remember how we were talking about the naming of Fortress and Cerebros? Apparently, Shout Factory subs have it as Cerebros.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did try to stick with original naming wherever they could, so makes sense.
And not to be a spoiler here, but we do get a silhouette of Zarak as part of one of the flashbacks earlier in the episode, but we don't actually see Zarak appear in the show for a little while yet. There's still some more episodes before we will eventually get to see Zarak somewhat in person.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, guess he's just on vacation right now. He's just a bit busy. Can't help with this whole Vector Sigma thing.
In terms of foreign localization, it's basically exactly the same. It's the history of Planet Master, the mystery of Planet Master. Although apparently the English dub, it's the tale of the Master Star.
Okay. I mean, it's a planet, not a star, but fine. Sounds fancy.
So there we go. So Andy, before we move on to our third and final episode of the day, any additional notes regarding episode 2?
Just can't believe they killed Soundwave, honestly. But no, I mean, it's a good episode. Like, and again, I mean, if episode 1 kind of set out its stall narratively, like, I feel like this episode sets out the stall for the series tonally, of just like, oh, okay, like, this is not, nothing is off the table here in terms of character deaths. There's the stakes are quite high here, and it's like, okay, it definitely, lit a fire under me of just like, oh no, okay, this is not just gonna be, robot fun times. So I'm interested in seeing where they go next.
So let's advance to our third and final episode of the day. That being Birth of the Fantastic Double Prime. In many ways, quite a misleading title after we get through it. Yeah, I will say...
I guess that also just sounds like, some kind of McDonald's burger that they've just, introduced as well.
Get your Double Prime burger now for only... How much? I've already go to McDonald's for $4.99. There you go.
I was trying to think of some Transformers currency. Only 200 credits.
Only 200 Energon cubes. Or Energon chips. We've had those before, haven't we?
Yeah, we have had Energon chips as well.
There we go. So I think this is a good time to mention how the title cards for the episodes, and this is partly in case anyone wants to join us, depending how many episodes we ultimately cover of Headmasters, the title cards will spoil stuff for you. I'm just going to put that out there right now. So in the interest of you perhaps not wanting to watch the title cards before the episode begins proper, don't be surprised, or at the very least don't read what the subtitle says, because at some point in the show it will spoil basically probably what happens near the end of the episode for you. Arguably, this title card does that, but we shan't describe what is on there.
Yeah, and it's I feel like, again, this is sort of a classic sort of, especially I feel like Japanese kids cartoon thing, where they often, whether I suspect it's probably, especially from this era, it's a kind of like TV listing magazine thing where, you see the episode title and you're just like, oh, well, I want to see that thing happen, rather than kind of perhaps the more modern thinking of like, well, no, you don't want to spoil what's going to happen so people watch it. This is more of a like, this is how you get people to watch it, by saying you're going to see this thing happen. And I think we're probably going to see a fair amount of that, I suspect, across the course of this season. Although it still doesn't give everything away, to be fair.
No, it doesn't, but if I recall from when I watched Headmasters as much as I did before, there is an episode where the title card gives away something that literally happens in the very last moment of the episode.
Yeah.
I do not remember the context at all, but I recall that happening. So
yeah, it's definitely a relatively frequent thing that you see in these kinds of shows. But yeah, if you're spoiler averse, then unfortunately the titles have no interest in that for you.
So episode 3 begins with Hot Rod and the Autobot Headmasters searching for the Matrix in the final possible location it could be, we are told. Galvatron then arrives at the Decepticon Earth base, so that's a thing now, everyone, with Cyclonus! Yes, everyone, he still exists! And the Decepticon Headmasters. We then get the following dialogue exchange between Cyclonus and Galvatron. Cyclonus saying, "What's this new director of Earth HQ like?" They're referring to Six Shot, by the way. Galvatron saying, "A tough guy. He's a bit odd, but you can trust him in battle." Cyclonus responds with, "And you think this guy is worthy of my total loyalty?" Galvatron responds with, "Ha ha ha ha, you want to betray him and find out?" To which Cyclonus, literally cowering in fear ever so suddenly, just goes, No, I would never betray him." And it's like, the tonal shift of this, Andy, I literally just went, what the heck just happened to Cyclonus?
Yeah, I mean, my note is like, what have they done? Why have they made Cyclonus wimpy? Because it's like, the season, because I mean, Cyclonus was kind of like the MVP of season 3 half the time. Like he was the one person that managed to keep kind of Galvatron in line to a certain extent. And so, yeah, it feels like a big turnaround for, well, the fact that Sixshot has basically taken his job, it kind of feels like, but also the fact that, yeah, that whole kind of cowering in fear thing, it's like, no, this isn't the Cyclonus that I know. So that definitely is a moment that felt a bit weird compared to what we've had before.
Following that conversation, there is little time for pleasantries, as Galvatron just outright cuts off Cyclonus as he's introducing himself to Sixshot, and orders everyone to just go stop Hot Rod, so the Decepticons can claim the Matrix for themselves. And they also now... So, to follow on from what happened at the end of I need to say Season 2, that's the wrong word, Episode 2, when it came to Laserbeak and Buzzsaw retrieving parts of Soundwave, we get the remnants of a report from Soundwave's tape deck, and Sixshot specifically vows to take care of Hot Rod after what they hear. Elsewhere, now aware of what the Decepticons' plans are, we see Ultra Magnus coordinating the Autobot response, with a few of the classic G1 characters along with both the Technobots and Protectobots aiming to help Hot Rod. The first instance we see the Protectobots intercepting the Decepticons is against the Combaticons, that sees action between Defensor and Bruticus, with the latter ultimately, Andy, being crushed by boulders in a ravine.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a good ravine in Transformers, so...
Hot Rod's team have been fruitlessly searching the last location. Now, it's name-checked in passing only as the last secret base. So, make of that what you will, everyone, but I felt the need to note that. And they're becoming demoralised at their lack of success. But then, Hot Rod begins to wonder if maybe the Matrix is hidden somewhere more obvious than one of the secret Autobot bases, so as to trick the enemy. We then cut back to Athenia, where Blur is getting quite antsy about the lack of news regarding how well the plan is or isn't going, and Cup starts looking like he's going to tell another old war story, when Fortress comes in and announces he is going to Cybertron to pass on the news of the search for the Matrix to Optimus Prime. Despite Cup's worries about the basement complex of Cybertron, i.e. the depths, the dweller of the depths if we go back to a past episode, Fortress assures him he knows it well. Now, a note from me here, Andy. There was an interesting character note here when Cup is sort of rallying everyone to believe in Hot Rod, because everyone starts just saying that they completely trust him. And it's interesting because we very rarely, if ever, got that sort of acknowledgement for Hot Rod / Rodimus Prime in general in the earlier seasons, if you will, season 3, as it were. So it was kind of a refreshing change to see that, and even just that, and the way that Hot Rod's been conducting himself in these episodes, it is a really great... It's just a great difference in character development, and actually already makes me think, you know what? If Hot Rod were to have to be leader at one point, or kind of be in the Ultra Magnus role of being like one of the upper tier commanders, I'd totally trust him now.
Yeah, and I mean... It's hard to tell whether this is just like the direction that they chose to take, or whether this is a very deliberate off the back of season 3, because it did feel like by the end of Return of Optimus Prime, kind of, you know, Hot Rod / Rodimus had sort of sorted himself out a little bit in terms of his crisis of confidence, and you know, was sort of on an even keel. So it's sort of, I feel like consistency wise, it sort of makes sense that like, okay, you know, fast forward a year down the line from that, and you know, getting to hang out with Optimus, he's probably found kind of, you know, a maturity and a belief in himself to be able to conduct himself better. So I'm kind of willing to buy into that as being just like, yep, this makes sense in the continuity. But it might also equally just be like, nah, let's just make Hot Rod competent this time, from the writer's point of view.
We then cut back to Cybertron, where Optimus Prime is still journeying through the catacombs to find Vector Sigma. He then opens a door and is attacked by energy leeches, or as the subtitles describe them, electric leeches from ancient times.
Which is a much better description, to be fair. I like it.
They also describe them as being like vampires. They suck out all the energy from your body. Optimus Prime is impacted by this and ultimately has to run out of the room because he can't cope. Prime's not having a good day. Back on Earth, Hot Rod and the Headmasters reach an Energon store only to be confronted by the Terracons. While the Headmasters fight the Terracons, who at this point have combined into Abominus, which overpowers the Headmasters, the Technobots then combine into Computron to continue the fight with the Decepticon team. I'm not gonna lie, Andy, trying to remember all the names of these combiners off the top of my head in this show so far at any given moment has been a bit of a mission. It's been a test of my knowledge.
Yeah. There's a lot. I had legit sort of almost forgotten, because they get dropped in so piecemeal, just how many combiner teams there are at this point. Because it's like, remember the good old days when it was just Devastator, and now you've got all of these other teams just cropping up as well. It's a lot.
It's almost like Japan knows what giant robot toys will sell the best.
Yep, they sure do. And that are the most cumulatively expensive, because you have to buy 5 of them every time.
Exactly. So that fight continues. While that is going on, Hot Rod is convinced by his comrades to just go inside the Energon storehouse and try and find the Matrix. We see him going through the building and he locates a hidden chamber, which I think this is the first time we've seen this, Andy, or at least it's the first time we're acknowledging it, but in the context of Transformers in general, we haven't seen it before Headmasters. But we get to see them sort of just looking around and like lots of sort of schematics and scanner readings appearing in his eyes, as it were, which is a really cool visual.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of is that classic, especially I feel like sort of 80s classic sort of, Terminator, etc. readout. Although I was very alarmed to see some go-to commands turning up in there. And as somebody who did some programming stuff when I was younger, there's one thing I was taught never to use, and that's go-to commands, because they're very unreliable and inefficient. So if the Autobots have been programmed badly, then, I'm just saying that they might need some recoding, is all.
Maybe that would explain Rodimus's crisis of confidence.
Yeah. It's just a go-to in the wrong place, and it's just taking him to the emotional turmoil part of his programming all the time.
Hot Rod. So I'm so used to saying Rodimus, I can't not say Hot Rod very easily. But Hot Rod locates the hidden chamber, which he detects via the scanners that in his eyes that we mentioned, and ultimately, Andy, to open this hidden chamber, he doesn't go and find a door. He does what any other giant robot who's under a time crunch would do. He just punches the floor. Makes a big hole. And what does he find in there? The Matrix. He then dashes outside to where, at this point, the Autobots have defeated Abominus, and they just tell him, get to the space bridge. And he begins running with the Matrix.
Yeah, if only he had some kind of vehicle mode that would allow him to move more quickly towards the space bridge. But alas.
He had to run, apparently. He couldn't transform and just have the Matrix on his passenger seat.
Yeah, no, I don't have many kind of like sofa commentary moments when I watch Transformers, but I was literally there just shouting at the TV, like, just transform into a car, you idiot. Like, why are you running with this? I mean, even in terms of just, safely transporting it, like, you can just toss it in the cockpit as you go, or put it in the chest cavity that you have specifically for the Matrix that would also make you Rodimus Prime, who is a stronger robot. That's also an option. Like, multiple options that were not just run with it really fast. I mean, in fact, everything positive I've said about the new Hot Rod / Rodimus, I take it all back. He's still an idiot. Like, what was he doing here? Terrible.
We had just built him up so much there, and all it took was for him to just run.
Or not run, drive.
Exactly right. But the thing is, though, Andy, we're proven right, because literally moments later, he runs into Galvatron and the 3 Decepticon Headmasters. And all he had to do was just drive past them.
Yeah.
And also, at this point, he's now just stopped dead in his tracks by Mind Wipe's hypnosis. So he's just now like, I can't move. Oh no. At which point, the other Autobots come to rescue him, Computron then keeps the Decepticons busy, while Hot Rod, now able to move, and the Headmasters, the Autobot Headmasters, head for Cybertron aboard the train bots. Did you keep up with that, everybody? Because it was difficult trying to note that down. They then use the space bridge and are Cybertron bound. On Cybertron, Vector Sigma's destabilization continues, with the planet now on the verge of self-destruction. Which this now adds a different element, Andy, in what is actually going on with Vector Sigma? Is there like a time limit on this for how long it can just be on neutral ground for?
Yeah, maybe. It's probably all those go-tos in the code that's just making it all very, very messy.
This is the part with the Vector Sigma element where I am very confused as to what exactly is going on.
Yeah, I mean, Vector Sigma is basically like the kind of MacGuffin of this entire arc, where it's like they've not really thought this part through. I feel like it's just like we need a center point that everybody has to race towards, and some kind of stakes in it, and then I don't know, question mark Vector Sigma stuff.
Now, Andy, when the planet's on the verge of self-destruction, and you've got to take your mind off it, there are many things one could do. You could run in panic. You could maybe have some food, last meal, I'm going to have some comfort food, as it were. You could just turn to drink, quite frankly. I'm sure there's lots of energy on there. I wouldn't have expected Daniel and Wheeling going to a barcade playing some video games being what they would have decided.
I don't know. That sounds like the most Wheelie and Daniel thing to do at the end of the universe. So, yeah, why not? I mean, it's not like probably their first choice was like, oh, we'll hit up Blaster and listen to some music. Oh, no, wait, we can't do that anymore. Barcade it is then.
It's like, well, we'll hit up Oh, I feel sad. Blaster's gone. And also, we don't get to hear a lot of the conversation because they're cut off by like an earthquake-style tremor. But it's looking like, they're about to discuss what they both think of Fortress. So that's clearly going to be a bit of a through line of they may trust sort of the Headmasters to help them out and such, like we saw with Wheelie in the last episode. But maybe Fortress they're still not entirely sold on at this moment.
God, I hope they're not going to try and find out when his birthday is.
You said it now, it's going to happen, isn't it? Speaking of Fortress, we see him entering Cybertron's catacombs, following Optimus Prime's trail, and he does that through a unique ability of his that we are introduced to, because he has got telepathic powers and sensors, and he communicates with Alpha Trion's ghost in order to guide Optimus Prime through the tunnels.
It's like, sure, of course he does. I'm not going to question it.
But his warning that there is danger approaching where they are at that point comes a little too late to prevent Optimus Prime from running into, Andy, giant rats. With spikes on their backs. Not robots, mind you, actual living rats.
Yeah. Not living for very long, though, as it turns out. Optimus Prime has no problem with just offing them.
Optimus Prime ain't taking no shit today.
No, it's like, again, it's just his like, oh yeah, freedom is the right of all sentient beings, but not you. You just get blasted.
You see, but this also adds credence, Andy, that the Autobots clearly didn't have everything in order because they really need to get pest control in.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does, you can understand that being a problem while the war's going on because it's, not priority number one, but this was supposedly Cybertron at peace. You'd have thought they'd be sorting out such matters, but clearly not. Again, yeah, very dysfunctional.
Maybe this is why Vector Sigma's about to explode. It's like, clear up the pest problem!
Yeah, it's like, look, I'll bring Galvatron in here if you can't fix this.
I'll go neutral. I'm warning you. So Optimus Prime fights them off and then heads down a different path, at last finding the chamber where Vector Sigma is contained. At this point, Prime notes that Vector Sigma has some amazing defensive capabilities, and that his own power, Optimus Prime that is, may not be enough to sort out the situation. You could have thought that before you made this really long journey here. But...
Yeah, I like the way you get to destination, like, I should have brought the Matrix. Like, great, now you notice.
But as he approaches Vector Sigma, it turns out that Cyclonus and Scourge have been waiting there the whole time because they beat him there. Cyclonus...
How? I need to ask how, because we've been on this long, like 3-episode long epic journey of Optimus Prime. Was there just like a front door that just like Cyclonus and Scourge went through? Like, oh, there we go, we're at Vector Sigma. And it's just like, this. I have questions.
I mean, given that we saw Optimus Prime go into so many wrong rooms and take so many wrong turns because, the ghost of Alpha Trion couldn't be a good GPS for him, it may have been, hey, there you go. They can both turn into flying vehicles. They clearly have GPS.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be they just flew past all the obstacles or something, but it just very much feels like there was an easier entrance. It's a bit like it's a bit like you're playing a video game and you've got the very difficult circuitous route to get a place, or you can just fast travel, and they just did the fast travel and they're like, there we go, we got there straight away.
You're just like, oh, I don't want to go through that giant cave with all those. I'm just going to fast travel past it.
Yeah. Maybe Optimus was just XP grinding, and that's why he went on that version.
Cyclonus says when they are revealed to be there, quote unquote, "We've been expecting you, Optimus Prime. As long as Vector Sigma is deranged, this is where you die." At this point, I'm just like, is Vector Sigma just having a mental breakdown? What is going on? We then see the two Decepticons get the upper hand on Optimus Prime because of their 2-on-1 advantage. Not something that we saw too often, Andy, before. So it was actually nice to see the Decepticons actually using tangible teamwork.
Yeah. Certainly, especially from like post-movie time, it was like, it was pretty much every man for himself all the time. In fact, it was usually the Decepticons actively fighting against one another. So yeah, a bit of teamwork can never go amiss.
At this point, the narrator notes, quote, "Now that Vector Sigma has power over Cyclonus and Scourge, he has an almighty struggle on his hands." Which, to me, implies Vector Sigma has possessed Cyclonus and Scourge to stop Prime from trying to do what he's going to do.
Yeah. I mean, it continues to be
This is very much where some of the story is just falling apart at this point.
Yeah. It's certainly not clear at best exactly what we're dealing with here at this point.
But we shall move on. Fortress, Galvatron, Hot Rod, and the Headmasters all soon arrive in quick succession into the chamber of Vector Sigma and turn the tide of battle. I appreciate I said Galvatron in that. It's just the way I wrote it down. Please don't at me. Alpha Trion's ghost then converts itself into energy, saying, quote unquote, "O almighty Matrix, resurrect yourself with cosmic wisdom and power." This causes Alpha Trion to then merge with the Matrix, which at this point is being held high by Hot Rod. It re-energizes the Matrix, and in turn causes Hot Rod to become Rodimus Prime. At this point, the opening theme to the show kicks in, and that's when you knew stuff was about to happen, Andy. At that point.
Always, for sure.
And the narrator literally says, quote unquote, "Behold, a dramatic moment in history, the birth of double Optimus Prime." To which I thought, really?
That's not how this works at all. But
you could say two primes in the same lake. I'm not going to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is where just double prime is all you need to know. But they clearly just got a little bit too excited. Like, there are two Optimus Primes. It's like, well, there will soon be fewer than that.
But is Optimus still Prime? I'm not going to get into this. We'll just call it like it is. The two Primes team up to defeat the Decepticons, which sees Galvatron literally thrown into a wall and being stuck in it.
This was funny for me because it was like shades of Transformers the movie, but just didn't quite finish the job. Because like in Transformers movie, he just gets thrown out into space. This time, I guess this building clearly had like better insulation or something than Unicron, and so he just gets kind of stuck halfway. And it's kind of an incredible moment of just like, we've just had this like momentous moment in history, and then we're almost immediately followed by just like Galvatron just like wiggling his legs in that like comedy I'm stuck in a wall fashion, which was quite
Please help.
something.
I'm stuck.
It's great.
So that happens, but just as Rodimus Prime is about to recharge Optimus Prime with the Matrix, just roll with me everybody on this, this gets a bit confusing, Vector Sigma starts to just flare up dangerously, like all sorts of stuff happening. This leads Optimus Prime to say, quote unquote, Rodimus, you have many important tasks ahead of you. I'll deal with Vector Sigma. Optimus then leaps into action in the only way he can, but is cut off by Galvatron, who's now freed himself from being stuck in the wall very rapidly. And I say briefly in all of that, because Optimus Prime picks up Galvatron and throws him at Vector Sigma, and then proceeds to just grab the mother computer that is Vector Sigma, before a giant beam of light is unleashed. Things calm down. We're not blinded by the light. Galvatron, seemingly unscathed, just leaves. Just gets up and leaves. But it turns out, Optimus is not so lucky. Rodimus grabs Optimus's body and turns him over, but Optimus is starting to turn grey. And we hear a line of dialogue, which I think is more an internal line, Andy. I don't think it was like an external thing. It came across as an internal thought to me. But Optimus says, quote unquote, I leave it in your hands, Rodimus. You are a great commander. Follow in my steps and fight for an Autobot victory and for peace. And then Optimus Prime turns grey.
Again.
You know what, Andy? I'm just going to call this like it is. If that had been how Optimus Prime had handed, or if that had been just outright how Rodimus had become Rodimus and he hadn't necessarily cost Optimus Prime his life, if that was the way that the mantle would have been handed over, nobody would have hated Hot Rod. No. At all.
No, this is true. I mean, it's almost funny that I'm almost surprised that they didn't make it his fault again, because they had the opportunity there to do that. But no, like this was a very. I mean, I still don't understand entirely what happened, given that Galvatron gets away scot-free and is just very much like, throw me once, shame on you, throw me twice, shame on me, I'm out of here. How he just bounces off that, I have no idea when it kills Optimus, but I guess I'll run with that. I also feel like Optimus's kind of closing line there should be like, follow in my footsteps, just with less of the dying bit, because that's probably more sound advice. But yeah, another one bites the dust. is basically, well, I mean, my notes just said Prime died again ? ? But here we are.
So I've just done a quick search on the TF Wiki here just to see if there is a note about this to try and elaborate. I'm going to read this verbatim. So it's Optimus Prime later died again. In another act of self-sacrifice, of course, when he walked into Vector Sigma and tried to bring it back under control directly. His body turned grey as he died, followed by a likely only symbolic scene of him telling Rodimus that it would be his responsibility to keep the Autobots going and continue his work, seen as a transparent sort of holographic figure a short time later, which we'll get onto in a second. But yeah, basically, even a TF Wiki can't really elaborate on that either. So, yeah. But the one note I do have here, and I've sort of looked at various things to try and ascertain this, the TF Wiki also speculates specifically on the episode page and synopsis that Optimus Prime fused his own essence with Vector Sigma. And I'm guessing that implies, like Alpha Trion did in the Key to Vector Sigma two-parter?
Yeah, that's probably what they're going for, in fairness, is something along those lines. So that kind of makes more sense.
So we'll have to go with that, basically. But, with all of that being said, we then hear the narrator, who says, quote, with valiant support from Fortress and the Autobot warriors, Rodimus Prime has wrestled control of Vector Sigma from the jaws of danger. Debatable, but sure. End quote, sorry. Then we cut, not the debatable part, that was before that, but you know what I mean. We then cut to the planet Char, Andy. Char still exists. And I've got to say, they've really done up the place because they've now got a base there. They're not just lying outside homeless.
Finally, if you had Decepticons build a new base on your bingo card, you can check that one off because that's been a little while coming.
And inside the base, we see that all the troops essentially have been brought together and Galvatron is addressing them. Over the top of the pictures that we see, the narrator says, quote, "However, now that Galvatron and his Decepticons have learnt the secret of Vector Sigma, they cannot rest in peace. The enemy is sure to make a counterattack." Quote. My first thought is, I'm guessing the secret of Vector Sigma is it could just, whoever has the power controls it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the thing, isn't it? It's going to be, trying to find ways to get control back. Or just blowing up Cybertron again. Why not? Like, we've not done that for a few episodes.
I mean, it'd be nice if we could just get clarity as to what the heck the secret is, but, you know. Then we see Rodimus looking into the sky, and as I was mentioning a second ago when I was reading a bit from another page, he's sort of looking towards the sun and can see kind of like a ghostly image of Optimus Prime, kind of like imagining he's in the sky and such. The narrator saying, quote, "Rodimus Prime, follow the last wish of Commander Optimus Prime, and rise up and fight for Autobot victory and for peace." The episode then ends with the now Commander Rodimus Prime and the Headmasters driving off as the episode fades to black and we get the wonderful ending title sequence.
Which is, I mean, kind of the ending titles feel like they're a little bit out of sync with the mood of the end of that episode, but it's still good, so that's fine.
It's like we go from like a very somber ending, and then suddenly we just cut into music of dun 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 dun.
Daniel being a helicopter. Okay.
But yes, Optimus Prime's dead again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not even at Optimus Prime will return. Narrator promises like, no, he's gone this time. We're not bringing him back.
I mean, heck if I know at this point. For all we know.
Will we get Power Master Prime at some point? Who knows?
I genuinely do not know because I do not know. But this episode was really great. Just a great. Not only a great like trilogy of episodes to start the show here, but just a great episode. Obviously, there are some glaring story elements which we couldn't even figure out between the two of us, which have gone a bit AWOL. But that aside, just really, really great stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the thing is, like, the nitty-gritty about Vector Sigma kind of doesn't matter too much. And certainly at this juncture, it's more just conceptually. Like I say, that is the MacGuffin for everybody to fight about. But yeah, it's a really good story arc. Like, it's like I say, it very much sets a tone, and I'm curious to see whether it keeps that tone up throughout the entire series. Headmasters didn't do a whole lot for a series called the Headmasters, I'll say. Like, they turned up, they helped to look around for some stuff, and that was kind of it. So hopefully we get a bit more of them up front and center in the future. But yeah, I mean, this is certainly a good kind of onboarding, I suspect, for people, because, some good Optimus Prime stuff, made some really good use of sort of existing characters. And this almost felt like that's what they wanted to do here, is like, okay, we've got to introduce the Headmasters. They're literally in the title of the show, but this is really all about kind of, the existing cast of characters first and foremost. And we can get to those guys once we've killed all the existing cast of characters. So yeah, like it's definitely a really strong opening. I wasn't sure how on board I was going to be for watching a whole bunch of this, but this certainly got me on board for watching a whole bunch of this. So yeah, good stuff.
So, when it comes to trivia notes and such, one thing that is coming across to me in some of the notes I'm seeing is I think Headmasters is going to be a mixed media type thing. And to try and elaborate on that for those who aren't aware, in Japan, there are some projects that occur whereby there's various forms of media that ultimately make it into one franchise. So, for example, there may be a manga/comic, there may be an anime, there may be a game, there may be like a random novel or something, all of which are actually canon in some way. And to get the full grasp of the story, you actually need to somehow read all of it. Because the reason I mention that is one of the notes here is that issue 1 of the Headmasters manga takes place shortly after this episode.
Okay.
So I don't know how much of a mixed media project this will ultimately be, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say if something else occurs in this show which we outright do not have the context of, chances are we may end up getting it in some form of trivia note because it's been part of something else.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see. Because I also like I'm pretty sure the head writer, with every pun intended, of this series was also like the writer of the original like G1 Transformers manga, which I've been meaning to read for the longest time and never have. So like I wonder whether there's even a little bit of crossover there with maybe some of the Vector Sigma stuff that we just haven't had access to. But yeah, that will be interesting to see whether there are elements that we're just expected to know from other media that we have not consumed.
Yes, the writer's name, Yoshihasa Araki, is the name. And just having a quick note on things. He's done scripts for loads of stuff, actually. He's even got some Gundam written here as well, which is very unsurprising. But also apparently wrote scripts for 7... Okay, sorry. Crossing thoughts here. Wrote a whole bunch of scripts for the Japanese Takara G1, as it were. So wrote 17 episodes for Headmasters, 16 for Super God Master Force, and 13 for Victory. By the sound of it. Yeah, he's done sort of various scripts and stuff as well. But additionally, the TF Wiki notes, was an anime screenwriter in the 70s and 80s. In the Transformers, he wrote some episodes of Headmasters, Super God Master Force, and Victory. Outside of Transformers, he wrote episodes for other giant mecha shows such as Mobile Suit Gundam, Daitan 3, Zarbungle, I think is how you pronounce that, and the second Tetsujin 28 show, aka New Gigantor, as well as non-mecha anime.
There we go.
So there we go on that front. Elsewhere, the energy leeches apparently may be the same creatures that we saw of similar ilk in Return of Optimus Prime Part 2.
Yeah.
I was going to say, admittedly, I don't recall them off the top of my head, but I won't argue it because it's the TF Wiki. They know far more than I do.
Yeah. I definitely feel like we've had leeches before in this show at some point. I just couldn't recall when.
Apparently, Cup references Rodimus Prime's defeat of Galvatron on planet Femenia, an event which occurred in the story of Super Robot Life Forms, the Transformers number 5. What on earth is that?
I guess that's maybe the manga.
So the story of Super Robot Life Forms, the Transformers, ran in TV Magazine, which is what we mentioned earlier at the start of the episode. So it's one of those sort of TV Magazine tie-in things. Again, kind of a mixed media element, so I wasn't wrong on that front. And apparently served as an accompaniment specifically to Transformers 2010, aka Season 3 in Japan.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
So there we go. So we're gradually getting our head around this, but yeah, there's definitely going to be some mixed media stuff happening here. I won't spoil this, as it were, but I'll just sort of read a note that apparently the telepathic powers thing that we noted of Fortress, that is foreshadowing for something.
Yeah, okay.
As it were. I'm not going to read any more of the notes so I don't spoil anything myself, but I can see that noted. Continuity errors. So, I'm going to read this verbatim and we'll see what we think of this. Okay, so it takes Optimus Prime, who has made the trip before, basically 1.5 episodes to traverse the tunnels and get to Vector Sigma's chamber, and yet Cyclonus and Scourge, who were on Earth earlier in this episode, were able to beat him there. And Galvatron and Rodimus, who only just left Earth a while ago, make it to the chamber in what seems like only minutes. What, did Optimus get lost on the way? Maybe that's why Alpha Trion's ghost came to guide him to Vector Sigma. Never ask Prime for directions. He's obviously horrible at them.
Yeah, exactly, as mentioned.
So, trivia notes. So, this episode is a study in how weird the Matrix is in Japan. With the wisdom of the ages having been drained to counteract the hate plague in Return of Optimus Prime Part 2, the Autobots have decided to recharge the Matrix by hooking it up to a power station. Potential spoiler here, as a little note, I don't know, but the final chapter of the Headmasters manga tries to justify this a bit, justify this a bit, excuse me, or at least gussy it up by pointing out that the energy is the life force of Earth. So presumably the power plant was gathering up natural energy, but, you know, still. And the fact it's actually recharged by Alpha Trion's ghost spinning around and going inside isn't much better.
No, I mean, the whole thing is a little bit wonky. I suspect that's probably one of those things where, like, in an ideal world, they would probably love to have had time to explain all the kind of post-Return of Optimus Prime stuff around the Matrix, but it's like, no, we can't have our first episode be deep lore on how the Matrix works and is powered, so we'll just work it as we go.
While relaying information in cassette mode, Ratbat plays not a recording, but a summary of events in a unique voice, in the same manner that Ravage did in More Than Meets the Eye Part 3. That's going way back now. Later in the series, however, he and other Decepticon cassette animals suddenly start talking in their robot modes.
Yeah.
Ratbat's gonna get a voice, Andy!
Yeah, you see, I mean, Ratbat is one cassette that did always have a voice in the comics. Like, he could always talk, so that I'm fine with. It's just the others that is a bit weird, which I realise is a strange distinction. Like, he's a bat, of course he can talk, but here we are.
Kind of actually, funnily enough, following up on what you were saying earlier about the code that appeared on screen, like in the eye scanners. A computer program written in BASIC flashes up on screen during POV shots for Hot Rod and Fortress. More basic code appears on Cup's monitor as he checks the state of Vector Sigma.
Yeah, it explains a lot about why the Autobots are so disorganized when everything is programmed in BASIC, but anyway.
So, the term double convoy is in reference to Convoy and Rodimus Convoy, i.e. Optimus Prime and Rodimus Prime, teaming up in presumably a takeoff on the double rider term of Kamen Rider 1 and Kamen Rider 2 from the original Kamen Rider series. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, the company that makes Kamen Rider also did the animation for Season 1 and 2 of the Generation 1 cartoon. It's also amusing to note both ran afoul of a group called Destrong.
Yes,
which is the Japanese term for Decepticon.
That is true.
In an odd touch, Rodimus Prime's character model seen here, and in the remainder of his appearances in Headmasters, is different from his US character model in several subtle ways, seemingly taking inspiration from the Studio Ox design. Studio Ox was originally a freelance art studio that produced more anime-styled Transformers art for TV magazine and comic Bomb throughout the early years of Generation 1 in Japan. In 1991, they became a company providing production and conceptual artwork for various anime, primarily reboots of older franchises such as Cyborg 009, the Cyborg Soldier, Tekkaman Blade, and Getter Robo Armageddon. They also created some short OVA series like Idol Project and Wild Cards, with a Z at the end. So, going back to the talk about Rodimus Prime's character model, his eyes now have thick borders around them, although this does vary depending on the shot. The wheels on his upper arms now face forward rather than backward, and his yellow spoiler has been beefed up in robot mode. So there you go. Also, they say here, did the writer forget that this is not the first time that Optimus Prime and Rodimus Prime show up together?
I mean, yeah, there is that as well. But this time they did it and they were cool, so it works different, I guess.
In terms of foreign localization, the infamous English dub simply called the episode The Birth of a New Leader. Talk about a flipping spoiler and a half there. At least the other one gives a little bit of mystery about it. Apparently, so the Shout Factory... Okay, there's two different versions here. The Shout Factory menu on the disc, apparently, calls this Behold the Birth of Double Prime, whereas the Shout Factory subtitle track calls the episode The Rebirth of Rodimus Prime.
I mean, none of which are inaccurate, I suppose, but...
And in Mandarin, Andy, this episode was known as The Birth of Rodimus Prime, the Second Leader.
I mean, I guess if they didn't get the movie either, then maybe that's a slightly more notable thing, but
Yeah. So there's some very interesting notes there, actually, just in general. And I think that just about wraps up this episode, Andy. We've gone a heck of a long time for this episode, but I think it's been more than worth it, and I've had a great fun discussing it. But any other additional notes you would like to make note of when it comes to this episode specifically?
No. I mean, it's been a good time. Like I say, I was a little wary going into these, but I got through the first 2 episodes. Like, no, I need to watch more of this. So yeah, I'm definitely in for watching more of this series, and especially now it's set the scene for everything. So I'm interested to see what the next batch of episodes brings.
Well, on that note, Andy, I guess we need to decide the next time we bring a podcast to you fine folks, how many episodes are we going to cover? Do we want to sort of go to 2? Do we want to keep it at 3? What are you thinking?
I feel like we should probably keep it at 3. I mean, these episodes, they're basically 20 minutes each. So, if they feel like they're marginally shorter than the US episodes. But yeah, we'll I guess we'll see how it goes when we watch them. And if there's some obvious arc to it, there's 2 episodes, we can always change. But let's aim for 3 and see what happens. See how many people they can kill in the next 3 episodes.
That means then we will be talking about episodes 4 to 6. I will ask you, Andy, on the off chance that some of these episode titles might spoil something, would you like to know the episode titles for the next 3 episodes?
Yeah, I'm not fussed about spoilers. I'm here for it.
So, episode 4, The Great Cassette Operation.
Okay. Intrigued.
Episode 5, Rebellion on Planet Beast.
Well, okay.
Episode 6, Approach of the Demon Meteorite.
I mean, all of these just make me want to watch these episodes more. I mean, I'm hoping that the Great Cassette Operation or whatever is the introduction of the pencil transformer that we discussed previously to rewind all the cassette tapes without Soundwave or Blaster around.
Oh my word. So folks, that's what we're going to be talking about next time. In terms of a time frame for the next episode, we're going to try and keep to sort of our fortnightly format, but don't be surprised if maybe it's a little bit longer, just depending how things go. But either way, we will cover episodes 4 to 6 before the end of the calendar year, which is a horrifying thing to say, Andy, I'm not going to lie, because we are that far into the year already.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm sure once we get around Christmas time, our schedule will be somewhat disrupted anyway. But yeah, we'll see. We'll work it as best we can, and we'll see what happens.
Indeed, we aren't going anywhere yet. It may just be a little bit longer to wait between episodes. But thank you very much for your support. And once again, if you've joined us on the likes of Apple, Spotify and such, do tell a friend about it. We'd really appreciate it if you would help spread the word of the podcast. If you want to reach out to us on social media, we do have Twitter and Instagram. You can find our podcast account under the name Starscream's Pod on both platforms. And with that being said, Andy, closing thoughts, anything else additional at all, or are you good to go, as it were?
No, I think we're good to go. This has been something of a pleasant surprise watching these episodes. So yeah, and now I've had these episode titles, I'm raring to go for the next one.
Until next time, everybody, from myself, Jeremy Graves, from him, Mr. Andy Hanley, you've been listening to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. Until next time, take care.
Bye, everyone.